Hello and welcome to Columbus Local Podcast. I am Len D'Amico and this is episode number 95. Tonight we have Matt Mees.
Hi.
Matt, how
fun
are
to
you,
be
sir?
here.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm so glad to be a part of it.
I appreciate you making the time. I know you're busy, but it's a fun conversation with someone that's been, at the kit.
Yeah.
And really making some strong contributions. And your stories are just so they're varied.
Well, it was you and I were talking before the podcast, and a lot of that has to do with all the different styles of music that I've been lucky enough to play, and every little musical world has their weird little moments and quirks and people within that community that make it interesting, and. So I've been a very lucky, very fortunate guy,
Good for you to feel that way, It's a good strong run that continues. Love it.
Yeah, and the Columbus community is a pretty close-knit bunch of folks, and they tend to be very supportive. So it's very easy to stay engaged, as a player. I've never felt like I was pushed to the side or I've never had the look. I'm a big guy, so I joke with my friends that I'm tired of getting hired for my looks.
That's right.
But it's the Columbus community. I mean, in this town, you can find great jazz, blues, swing music, horn players. There's the list.
Matt, I was impressed when at the end of Bella Witt and the Fog show at Rambling House in recent time, you and I had a moment to hang out on the patio afterward, and I was trying to woo you to do an episode, and of course you were, game. Day
I'm
one.
totally game. Yeah.
You did some travel, you came back, and we got the date. But what was fun for me personally is the first time I met you, and I was impressed that you remembered it because you remembered some of the details of it. But it's such a vivid memory to me because it was a profound musical impact. And if you don't mind, I'd like to open this conversation with that story because I was with friends and I was with neighbors down in Lake Cumberland. What state is that?
Kentucky.
Yes. See, that's the kind of weekend I had.
Yeah.
I didn't remember.
People go to Lake Cumberland to party. So.
We did. We had a couple of houseboats, and one of the stops was somebody knew somebody that had a house on the lake, and there was a concert that was being played. So after several days of heavy partying on the lake in these boats, we cruised over to this house that we had to dock the boats and then climb literally up the side of the mountain because they were draining the lake.
Okay.
At that time for some repairs, I believe. So the stairway was way up high, like 17,500 steps high. After a weekend of partying, but drawn closer by the sound of the drums and the bass line and just this really hot groove rumbling across the lake as we're veering toward this place.
Yeah.
And at the top of the 17,500 steps, gasping for air, was Gus Lambros trio. Okay.
Electric Mud.
And who was the drummer but Matt Mees?
Yeah. I was covering that gig for a dear friend of mine, and that was so much fun. I think the fellow was part owner of Worthington Industries, and we were there maybe Memorial Day weekend, some sort of.
It was something that I was able.
Or Labor Day or
get
something.
More than 2 days of a weekend.
Yeah, it was an extended weekend, and we were hired to play for a private party. And while we were playing, the thing I remember vividly about it was we started right as it started to get dark.
Yes.
And when we first started, we had this beautiful view of the lake. We're up on this piece of property that's, like you said, way up above the lake.
Absolutely gorgeous.
It was an amazing piece of property, and the view was astounding. And we were set up on what was basically his back patio, porch kind of thing. And the PA was pointed out over the lake, and of course over water it just carried forever. And we were going at it, and as it got dark, you could see the lights from the houseboats, and it was like little moths being drawn to a flame. And by the time we were done, a couple hours into the show, there was a little cluster of maybe 15 little houseboats with all their lights on, and we could hear the clapping. We'd get done with the song, and the people that we were playing for at the private party in this fellow's house, they were all enjoying it too.
Oh my God, yeah.
But you could hear the noise and the and the hooting and whatnot
From the lake.
from the lake, which was
Yes.
700-800 feet away from me.
But you couldn't see them because it was
Just
pitch
dark,
black.
but I could see the lights on the boats, so you knew they were there. And then you'd hear the hooting
hear
and
the
hollering.
roar, dude.
And
It
it,
was like,
ended up being a really fun gig. We talked about that and laughed about it many times afterwards.
Dude, I'm telling you, that party, the music was, it was life changing for me. It was an inspiring moment.
Okay.
And the thing that really was cool was you took the time to talk to me at the breaks.
Sure.
You know, and it was cool. And
Yeah.
I met Gus, and I talked with him because I was into guitar at the time, and learned about, you know, his approach to all the cool material you guys were playing that night.
Yeah.
It was a great party.
Yeah, it was. And Gus covers a lot of ground. So, you know, if you're a player, as you are, it's going to be especially appealing because you'll hear everything from Jimmy Thackeray to classic old Stevie Ray Vaughan songs, and not the Stevie Ray Vaughan songs everybody else covers.
Right.
And you know, Gus grew up on a steady diet of all the old blues guys and the early rock guys, and Rory Gallagher and all those kind of guys, and he could play like them. And the other thing, that he's one of the most consistent guitar players I've ever worked with. You know, he's, you know, if he just almost never makes a mistake.
Right.
You know, he's just so smooth with it, and you can tell he's not the kind of player who sat and learned it out of books.
He's playing from his soul.
Yeah, and so I always liked covering that gig, and his bass player Scott and him are just a perfect pair, and so joyous for a guy like me to come into. As you know, the bass player was so good. You know, you kind of had to bring your A game because you're there on stage with two guys who really know what they're doing. And
Was it possible Scott was the bass player that day?
Oh, he was.
Back in
I know for sure he
the
was.
turn of the century.
Yeah, that was all those years ago.
It was 25 years ago, Matt.
Yeah.
But I remember it like it was like last weekend.
Yeah.
I mean, that gig was powerful to me.
And you know, it was a fun gig. I remember it very well. But for me, it was another day.
It's one of a million gigs you've done.
Yeah. But don't get me wrong, I do remember that gig because of the lake and the boats and all that. I remember it vividly.
Just a memorable time.
And the guy we were staying with was a total sweetheart, you know, just let us have run of the property. And so that was a...
Absolutely cool.
Yeah, what a
It was
cool gig to meet
stuff.
at, huh?
Oh my God, yeah. Well, you know, and I was familiar with the Gods, and you know,
Sure.
we had talked about the fact that you played in the Gods.
Yes.
As drummer for like 10, 11 years.
Not
Close-
quite that long,
close
about
to.
8. Yeah, I was 91 through the end of 98 in that band. But yeah, I mean,
And Matt, was Mark Chatfield part of the band in the
Mark's the
early
one who
part of
got
that?
me in the band,
Okay.
and he played with us for the first couple years, and then he had to split because he was opening Countdown, and I think he had other stuff he wanted to do. You know, Mark had an on-again, off-again relationship with Eric, and Mark and I had played together with Bo Diddley and a couple other projects. We had a band called Daddy Longlegs with Ronald Cole, and so Mark and I got along musically. You know, he understood me and I understood him, and so they just got an offer one time to go. One of their biggest markets was San Antonio. They sold more records there than anywhere, and so Mark and Eric got a hold of me, and they're like, "Do you want to do this one gig down in San Antonio?" And the money was great, and they were going to fly us down and provide the gear, and you know, it was airplanes and limousines. And I was like, "Yeah,
I'm in.
I'm in." And so I had to learn the whole set in 2 days, and I played. So I joined the band on a Tuesday, and we played Thursday in front of 20,000 people in San Antonio, and.
Do you remember who all was on the lineup?
Oh yeah, we had Ed Means, the rhythm guitar player from Rosie,
Nice.
and Mark and Eric and me.
Nice.
Yeah, so it was as close to the real thing, and I was always proud to be in the band with Mark and Eric at the same time because that was as close to me playing with the original
Right.
as you were going to get, and so that was, you know, that was definitely one of the highlights of my whole career. It was that first night on stage with those guys. And
So awesome.
Mark told me later, he looked back at me at one point and he said, it looked like you were in the front row of a roller coaster. Because, I'm up there as the drummer just trying to, just like, I'm in the band 48 hours and I had to learn a whole batch of songs. And, even though the Gods was considered a kind of a working class biker band or whatever, some of the arrangements were pretty, like the live arrangement of Gotta Keep Her Running, there was a lot of moves in there. And they had another song called Hey You that's got a really cool intro. But Mark, the thing of that, even though I came from both the education way of playing music and learning from records, which is how I learned how to play the drums, Mark spoke fluent drummer. And beginning of Hey You, I'm having a hard time trying to figure out where the hi-hat pattern sits in the groove. And Mark just turns to me and goes, My Woman from Tokyo.
Oh, sweet.
The old Deep Purple song, which starts with that old Ian Pace part. And he knew I'd know it, and it just put it all like, oh, now I get it. And that was one of the joys of working with Mark, because he understood if you just say this phrase to a drummer, the drummer's going to immediately,
Pick up.
Yeah, because it's almost like as a drummer, we all know back then, growing up when I did, everybody knew Ian Pace. And if you'd been around playing rock and roll tunes, you knew the intro to My Woman from Tokyo. And it was perfect.
So cool.
Yeah, it's one of those little things I remember about Mark that I loved.
Communicating on stage.
Yeah, well, and even like in rehearsal, like, my learned friends, my guys who play jazz and guys who read charts, and I do a tiny bit of that. I'm not really that good at it, but I speak the language because I grew up reading music, and I can say it comes in on the and of three. But the guys in rock and roll land are going to be like, they don't usually use, a lot of them don't use terms from technical musical stuff. So they'll have a different way of, they'll use words like anticipate the beat or whatever. But the jazz guys will say it's on the E of this or the and of that. Luckily, I operate in both worlds. But Mark was smart enough to know, okay, if I throw this at you,
you're going to know.
Yeah, I mean, as a drummer, you can say, it needed to sound like the thing from AC/DC or whatever. And most drummers are going to be like, oh, sure.
Absolutely.
Or if you're from the old school, you can go, it's on 2 and 4, and you got kick drum on 1, 2, 3. You know what I mean? Some guys will tell you like that. And so for me, it's always been nice to have both. But I loved Mark because he could speak fluent musician, fluent drummer, and get his idea across. And of course, you listen to what he said because he's real picky in all the right ways.
Yes.
I remember when we had a cover band that played for years called Lovehead on Tuesday nights up at Hot Peppers, and it was a big draw for a long time. And we were working on a Interstate Love Song, Stone Temple Pilots, and the chords in that, the DeLeo brothers are brilliant.
Oh.
And I remember Mark spent some real time getting those chords just right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The
intro to that song and the way those chords work and everything. And he's one of the guitar players that really took the time to like get it as close as you can possibly get it with one guitar, and he's the kind of guy who, if we're going to do a Rolling Stone song, he might show up with a 5-string properly tuned, I'm just saying, like,
yeah.
And that's one of the things I love.
Studies,
it's one of the things I learned from Mark. Like, if you're smart, the guys who've gotten to a certain point or the guys who have a certain reputation, you start to try to figure out why. And with Mark, he always showed up on time and the gear was always right, but he always expected the people around him, to operate at the same level. And
part.
Yeah, and he would get really pissed if you showed up to rehearsal, and he would understand if you didn't play it right the first time, but he could always tell if you hadn't spent the right amount of time doing your homework, and that pissed him off. And I totally get that.
Yeah.
I totally, to this day. And the other thing he taught me, he's one of those guys. It doesn't matter where he's playing. He can be playing in front of 5 people or 50,000. He's going to put on the same show.
Right.
And he cares about it because he has pride. He doesn't want somebody to come in and see him play on a lesser day. There's a big famous quote from Joe DiMaggio towards the end of his career, the baseball star. And he was one of the guys on the team was like, man, you're older now. Your legacy's intact. He says, why do you play so hard? Because Joe played hard till the end of his career. And Joe's like, might be somebody in the stands who hasn't seen me play yet.
Wow.
And I kind of like apply that with Mark, because it just didn't matter.
Right.
And I love him for that. So to this day, I don't put on quite the show that Mark does. It's not about, for me, it's the playing. Like, if I'm in a public venue, I don't care if I'm playing with somebody you've never heard of, or I'm playing with Paul McCartney. Yeah, not that I ever have, but I'm just saying, to me, it doesn't matter the size. If you're on stage in front of people, play your best.
Right.
No matter where you are or for who you're working for. If you're in the studio recording a song you don't like, whatever.
Play it.
You gotta bring everything you can to bear every time you count to 4 and start a song. And Mark does that. And to this day, if you watch him play, he means every note. And I think there's a lot to be learned about that.
There is.
No
question about it.
I've been on stage with other players who this gig isn't really that important. I'm not gonna, I'm just gonna get through it. And those are the guys who, if you were to count at the end of the day, those are the guys who didn't leave much of a mark on the scene. Not that that's your job, or who cares, really. In the end, who cares if you did or not? But on a personal note, I think it just comes down to pride in your work. To get all old-fashioned and weird about it. If there was a really long-winded diatribe, but
not at all.
But
I mean, it's
but
good,
for
it's
me,
good insight, right?
Yeah, I think so. I think, I do my homework. I spend so much time working on songs. And I found, from a drummer's point of view, I don't want to rely on charts, because it takes away some of the spontaneity. Like I was talking to you before we started the podcast, I'm playing in a 12-piece horn band now, and some of those arrangements are pretty
challenging
and long. And but I'm just the kind of guy who would rather get the Spotify page and play the song 800 times and try to get it to feel. And I'm not going to cop the guy's licks 100%, but I'm going to make the song try to taste exactly like it does on the record.
Capture that spirit.
So when you buy my version of that brownie and taste it, it tastes like, yeah. And I think it gives you a certain amount of spontaneity. It frees you up to let a little more of your personality out. Like when you watch The Drummer with Paul McCartney, he'll change a little bit of Ringo stuff. It'll be close, but there'll be a few moments where he does his own thing. But he knows those songs so well that he'll add a little snare beat that Ringo didn't do, or he'll leave one out that Ringo did, but it just doesn't matter, because he's covering it so well that it feels like you're getting that thing.
It's the spirit.
It's the spirit of the thing. And he can still have a little of him, Abe Laboriel Jr., he can still have a little of his thing come through without it getting in the way of what you're trying to get out of it. And so as a drummer who's called upon to play a lot of other people's material, that's this thing I get, like in that moment in the middle of a Steely Dan song. If you know it really well, if you know the lick that whomever is on the record played, you can do your version of it. You can make it feel the same. You can even use the same amount of beats to lay it out, but you might have a different inflection on the Flimmity Flam or the Radamaque or whatever thing you're doing. And yours might come out a little different. Like when you see Keith Carlock cover a Steely Dan song, it's going to feel different than when you see Dennis Chambers cover a Steely Dan song. They'll both do an amazing job with it.
Right.
But you're going to walk away with like, oh, that was
the spirit.
Yeah, the spirit. But also Dennis's little tiny bit of like, oh, I make my spaghetti sauce with a bay leaf. It's still really good spaghetti sauce, but now, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I use a lot of cooking analogies because, there's 100 different versions of spaghetti sauce and they're all good. But, which one is the one that you want? Which one's your version? Which one does Len make when he's at home?
Right.
You know what I mean? And so I think when you're covering other people's stuff, you got to get 99% of it spot on. You got to know the arrangement. You got to know where all the basic snare hits and breaks and stops and all that stuff are. But every now and then, if you're in the middle of a Blink-182 song and you use a single stroke instead of a double stroke, who's going to know? And, but it might give it a different, just a little, it was an interesting way to approach getting into the bridge or whatever. And so I think for musicians who've been playing like forever, that's how we stay interested in some of it. As well as, your personality still gets to shine through.
Right.
And you're not abusing your bandmates by trying to play, Bridge of Sighs as a bossa nova or whatever, unless the band is purposely doing something silly, which I've been in lots of bands that do that too. We used to do country versions of Hey Joe and reggae versions of this, and just to. We had a group of people that used to come see one of the bands I'm in play. And they would always, dude, I'm scared, and we were just like, and they did it as a joke, and so we just went along with it. And then one time we said okay, and we didn't tell them, and we learned Freebird, but we played it reggae.
Oh my gosh!
And we called it Discount Bird, and
Discount Bird.
And they loved it. And
well, of course,
yeah. So, sometimes as a player, you're lucky enough to be in bands where you can do silly things. I've always had a big sense of humor with music. Not everybody does. To some people, it's kind of sacred ground. To
not like put a little something at the end of the song.
Or no, I mean like actually switch it up. I mean, completely mess with it on purpose. And for me, I take
it depends on the project, though, right? Doesn't it?
Well, my point is, like, if you're covering a song, you probably like it.
Yeah.
You're not covering it just to make fun of it. So for me, sometimes, like, for instance, I was in a cover band. We used to do a straight up version of I Kissed a Girl. But we were dudes. But you could, whatever. Who cares? And, but I was in a band for years called Hootie McBoob, which is a goofy band. They're all over YouTube. You can find clips of us doing really funny.
Are you guys playing ever out now?
No, that band has the lead singer is no longer able to because of his knuckle issues. He's an older guy, can't play. And Chris, our original guitar player, now lives in Texas. He's on the road with Pat Green all the time. But that band would do like really fast bluegrass versions of Run to the Hills by Iron Maiden. Run to the hills, run for... And he would play... He was a really good country player. And he would do like high-speed chicken picking. But he also knew the real version, so every now and then he would like quote it, but in country style.
And then blend it.
And we were doing like... we weren't doing the real groove. We were playing a bluegrass. Boom, tip, boom, tip, boom, tip, boom, tip. And...
Interesting.
It was just the
people
goofiest,
loved it,
and people loved it, and
sure.
we would play it at hillbilly bars.
Even better.
Yeah, there was a place that's gone now, but there was a place called the Pit Stop for years, and another place called the Breakaway.
I have played the Pit Stop.
Yeah, well then you know what it was like. It was a kind of a throwback, From,
oh yeah.
And it was it was hillbilly bar, but as long as I know what I'm walking into, I'm good with that.
Absolutely.
And the guy who owned it, John, He's like, hey, man, I like what you do. Here's 4 hours. I'll pay you guys. Just do whatever you want. And literally, we would go up there and we wouldn't like take advantage of it by not playing. But our set list was we would do a straight down the middle version of a Stevie Ray Vaughan song and then we'd take some Ted Nugent song and play it reggae or, play a swing. Oh, we did a bossa nova version of Bridge of Sighs by Robin Trower, but we called it Bridge of Salsa. We did a Latin version.
Wow.
And it was actually really cool.
Don't doubt it.
Yeah. So sometimes as a player, it's fun to do that. Like I told you before we started the podcast, I grew up on a steady diet of everything from classical music to Frank Zappa. And so to me, it's all okay. Am I allowed to reference one of my other local heroes?
Absolutely.
There's a fellow here in town. He doesn't play out much anymore. I think he's dealing with health issues. A guy named Jimmy Casto. Jimmy's been one of the biggest name guys in town forever. He's played with everybody. And he goes online by the name James Brooke Casto. But anyway, I went to high school with Ronald Cole. He graduated from the same school I did. And he graduated in my brother's class a couple years ahead of me. But I knew Ron from high school when he was Ron Guzlin.
Oh, nice.
That was his real name. And Ron and I, anyway.
Oh, my God.
I was in a band, my first band out of high school that was playing. I was 18 years old, and we were warming up for Ronald Cole at Mr. Brown's. And Jimmy Casto's playing drums, and I'm sitting backstage during their set. I'd never seen him live. I've heard some of the tapes. He was so good, and he was so crafty. I use the word crafty when I talk about his playing. He's one of those pop drummers that comes up with stuff. You're like, oh, I would have never thought of that. That's brilliant. And he had this enormous background in R&B and jazz and all this other stuff. And he knew how to play straight. So, like, he could bring these. It's like the first time you see Stewart. It's like when Stewart wants to just play a straight pocket, he will. But then he'll blow your mind with, like, oh, that was a really cool way. So I watched him play 90 minutes of the craftiest stuff I've ever seen, and they're just killing it. It was in their heyday, just killing it, mowing people down. And so they get done, and we're all backstage after the show yakking and carrying on. And I sat with Jimmy for half an hour and talked, and I was a nobody, but he was nice enough to just sit and chat. And I was a good enough player that he took me seriously, I guess. But the thing I got from him during that conversation, he's like, hey, man, I'm playing in this swing band. I'm doing this blues band. I got this thing that I do that's kind of a jazz thing. And so he was the first guy. I was like 18 years old, 17 years old, coming out on the scene for the first time. And he let me know right out of the gate, being a musical omnivore is really cool. And so I immediately took a page out of that book.
Yeah, so how old were you then?
18,
Early,
17. Years away. I'm literally just out of high school. And the friend of mine in high school and I, the band that we started in high school, as soon as we got out, we're booking it. Because this was 18 drinking age. This is back before when you could still get 3-2 beer.
Oh, yeah.
Way back, yeah. So we could get into the clubs at 18, we could book our band. And the singer was a couple years older than us, the girl, Amy. It was a band called Amy and the Boys. And we played around town for years. We got big enough we'd sell out the Newport.
Nice.
In fact, on my Facebook page, my little profile picture, there's, I think that's from
that show?
Might have been the Newport show.
Nice.
Yeah. And, the first time I was ever in front of a crowd of like, oh, wow.
Yeah, this is where it is.
Whoa.
So that was your first.
That was probably my first. That was my very first moment in a 1,500 seat theater where real rock and roll happened all the time.
Late teens.
Yeah, I'm on the same stage where the Clash played and stuff. It's like, oh, okay, this is real.
This is it.
And we had a really good weekend. The opening weekend for OSU back then, they would always have 2 nights of concerts. And 2 years in a row, we got one of those. And we sold them out. I mean, it was packed. Part of it was because it was the first weekend on campus, and a lot of 18-year-olds are going out.
But you have to bring
but
the goods.
Part of it was our draw.
Brought the goods, right?
Yeah, part of it was our draw. We had worked around campus for years, had house gigs at Ruby's and all these other places. But getting back to the thing I was talking about, is Jimmy was one of the first guys at a very early age that's like, man, it's all good. It's all good. Do your thing. Do more than one thing. And so for my whole life now, I've been, I love playing the Gods. I love playing with Bo Diddley. I love playing this thing I got now called The Remedies. It's an organ trio, playing John Scofield and some jazzy Delvin Lamar organ trio stuff.
Where do you guys play?
We've done 2-hour gigs at Woodlands. We've done 2-hour gigs at Rumba. We've done like Eldorado's before Rick Kalura had the Sunday thing. We would do Sundays in there for a while. And we're just going to start booking gigs again. We've been off for a couple months. We're kind of getting a new keyboard player.
Sure.
Worked in. But the stuff from a drummer's point of view is super challenging. Really good players on the records. And some of it's straight up jazz. So for me, even though I've never been known in town as that guy, because I'm not a purist jazz player at all, I love to dip my toe in that water whenever I can, because it's so good for you, too, as a player. Because it keeps you humble. You just realize where you are in the totem pole. In this town, people know me because I've been around since Lincoln was shot, and so I always laugh when people are like, "Oh, dude, you're one of the better players in town." I'm like, oh, "Man, okay, let's talk about." I go see guys. It's like I don't even know what they're doing.
There's a lot of good.
It's so easy in this town to be humble. It's so easy to be humble.
But nobody, yeah.
Go to Dick's Den on like a Wednesday, and you'll see 3 guys that just blow your mind. Right. Just blow your mind. Like, oh God. So for me, once again, the Columbus scene has always been. It's just so easy to be humble. It's just. You can go see Andy Woodson do his thing with Jim Rupp or whoever he's got playing, Reggie Jackson or.
Reggie, you brought that name up. Okay, so Reggie, to me, holy shit.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, like, if you have an opportunity, I don't know his background either, but he really, when you see him, there's something there.
Okay, he's one of the best players in town, man.
It's just like, oh my God.
And these guys that I'm talking about, like Reggie and Barthel III, Willie Barthel, those guys, they can hang with anybody. And Willie's now out with, Randolph in the Family Band.
Nice.
You know, he's their guy.
Yep.
And, you know, Mark Stepper, I was telling you earlier, he's out with Wallflowers. And I guess he's taken on that gig now full time. I think he was subbing at first, but now he's
kind of,
you know, there's another Capital University grad. So Columbus just has an enormous. Aaron Tastian is another guy that's leaving his mark all over the world. I mean, he's phenomenal. He lives in Nashville now, but he grew up in New Albany. And I remember seeing Aaron play. I was lucky enough to play with him and his girl at Rumba for her record release party in June. And that was really fun.
Nice.
And, you know, he's just a world-class player, and he's another one of those guys that songwriting is one of the most prolific songwriters, just unbelievable. But he's had a couple of hits. He's been on Conan. He's, you know, he's one of those guys that's created a career that'll always be there for him. He can tour at his level and do fine with it because the quality is just there. People come out, and he's another one of those guys. I was telling you about my buddy Scott Gorsuch, too, another local guy who doesn't get enough attention. He's one of the best songwriters. Just go to his Spotify page and listen to any of it.
Can't wait.
Yeah.
Can't wait.
Amazing musicians, and they're all writing their own stuff. So, you know, as a kid, when I was coming up, I never wanted to be in the world's biggest cover band. You know, I really love, my favorite part of the whole thing is the writing, the recording, and the first couple times, you know, you play live with something is really exciting.
Oh, sure.
I mean, I love the live stuff too. I'm not poo-pooing any of that, but the thing that really gets me going is when you're wrestling with a particularly challenging piece of material, and you finally get the track down, the one that you know, you struggled with it for 2 months in rehearsal, and you know, you finally get the thing down. There's a feeling that you get from that when you know the work is good, and you can always judge your own work. Myself, I've always had a gauge for like, well, that was actually good, which I never like anything I do. Honestly, I can't really go back and re-listen to stuff I'm on. I will tell other people to listen to it, then I gotta go. You know, like just the way I feel. Like every time I hear recordings I'm on, I'm like, oh, I could have done that better. And perfect example. Sadly, the only man that I ever charted with in my whole life just passed away.
I'm sorry.
He was in a car wreck. His name was Mark May. He was a big R&B guy out of Texas.
Yep.
His dad was based here in town. He moved back to town 10, 12 years ago to be with his dad near the end. And then he stuck around for a while, and then he moved back to Texas. Well, while he was here, he asked me to guest on his record and do 2 songs on a record called Blues Heaven. And I said, okay. And so I did. And we were in what I thought was rehearsal. The drums were all mic'd up, though. I should have known better. And so we get done with a take where I was like, I got pretty close to it, but I knew it wasn't the take. And they're like, okay, we got what we want from the control room. And I was like, oh, wait, no. And they're like, no, this is good. You know, so I don't know if they settled or they really liked what I did. Anyway, that was the single.
They communicated that they did.
They communicated that they did.
Yeah.
And I kind of, even as I'm leaving, I thought, well, I'll be back and we'll record it. Like that's the take for the demo, or I don't know. But then I found out later that's the final take, and it sat in the top 10 that whole summer on Billboard, right between Tedeschi Trucks and Eric Clapton.
Good for you, man.
And it's the only record I've ever been in the top 10 on, and I'm proud to be a part of it and all that stuff. But to this day,
oh my God,
I love the song, but when I listen to it, all I hear is the stuff that so now.
The stuff that didn't make it in.
Yeah, I'll have friends of
man.
mine who'll be like, hey, we're listening on Sirius Radio. They just played that song. And I'm always like, oh, I hope you liked it. It's a great song. Mark's phenomenal.
Yes.
Great singer, great writer.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal guitar player, and soulful, one of the most soulful cats ever. And, so it's just one of those things as a player. I think the guys who really are the real guys who are in it for all the right reasons, they know when they got it right and when they didn't. And you just got to live with that.
You have to live with it.
Yeah, especially if it's on a recording, people are going to hear for long after I'm gone.
It happens, But,
yeah.
You relish in the fact that maybe you didn't do
Well, I just
in
have to
your
be like, if
mind.
they're good with it, then I'm good. Especially
Yes.
when I'm kind of like a hired gun. Like, I was never his full-time drummer. So if I'm a full-time member of the band, I'll fight for my stuff a little harder. But if I'm just a hired gun, like, hey, you just needed a drummer for the session,
And they took it.
and they took it, and if they like it, then I'm good. It's the same reason I'm so weird about, like, there's a thing called Beat Detective now they use, where they'll put your drums on a grid. But what it does is they're getting better at it. And I don't mind it too much, but it'll kind of sterilize the drums so that everything's right in the middle of the beat, instead of that little bit of thing that you do as a drummer where you move or you sit
As a
behind.
human. Yeah.
Exactly. And they're getting the technology so it feels more human. But one of the things that a couple of engineers I've worked with over the years, they laugh, is if I'm a full-time member of the band, please turn that thing off. And the reason is, if I'm sitting behind the beat, it's because I'm trying to sit behind the beat. That's what I'm trying to do. So
That's the sound.
please don't sterilize it. Run it through what I call the drum sterilizer. And sometimes you need that to move a session along when you're dealing with players who don't get that. But for a lot of us guys, so I think that for me, it's a strange old school guy approach to a new school thing. I almost wonder, is this my Grandpa Simpson coming out?
Yeah, no, but to your point, though, is that not part of a particular piece? In other words, playing behind the beat
Yes,
versus
yes.
playing ahead?
Now, once in a while, if it fixes,
fixes
if you can fix my mistake with that thing and it'll save us 2 hours of recording time,
different situation.
different situation. But when they put it on the whole mix and your whole, every hit of the snare drum moves to a slightly different spot, and suddenly I'll listen to a recording, it's like, it doesn't sound like me. It sounds like my drums, but it sounds like somebody else is playing them.
it.
So, this is all part of a larger conversation I have about the rise of the machine in music.
Because you've lived through all of that.
I've lived through all of that. When I first started recording, my first record was with a band called Ernie Lee and Deep Country in 1981, a single. And of course, that was all to tape. And the only thing you could do then was punch in if the cymbals weren't ringing. Like, if you had a long enough break, you could do okay, you can do the second half of the drums, but you kind of had to do the drums in one take and get them all down.
Right.
And I think that there's a certain joy of getting the whole thing down. Because, like Joe Walsh said, you're really trying to record the ultimate version of that song, and you want the players to feel... that's why I always like doing basic tracks with the guys. I've been in a lot of sessions where I get hired to put stuff under tracks that are already there, which is always weird for me because I don't even know how the guys I'm going to play with play. So you spend your first half an hour trying to figure out where's my part in this universe. But if you're in a band with a bunch of guys who sweated it out in a rehearsal room, there's something for me I like about that energy of the guys playing at least as many of the tracks as they can before overdubs start. Because then the better the song has a feel. The last record I did with Scott Gorsuch, we actually played to no click at all. We just went right to tape, and purposely, and it was one of the most freeing, and it's one of my favorite records of his that I'm on. Because even though the song will flex a little bit, it's like when you listen to When the Levee Breaks, the tempo actually does change. If you put that on a grid, it doesn't keep perfect time.
Right.
It's supposed to breathe. In the chorus, it might move up a little, click or 2 beats per minute, and then in the verse, it might settle back down.
Right.
And I think it gives the song some life. There's a heartbeat in there. And I think in a lot of stuff that you hear that's recorded with machines,
computer,
or
yeah.
are primarily computers and machines and whatnot, I think there's a certain amount of disposability. I call that stuff recorded product.
Yes.
It's like you can buy American
Loops.
cheese food slices, but it's not real cheese.
It's a cheese food.
It's a cheese food.
Right.
And I think that a lot of the music that's made when they use primarily non-musicians, when it's primarily digital bits recreating a part, I find it very unappealing. It's very sterile to me.
Yeah,
And
agreed.
and it's funny because back when like R&B first started leaning towards rap and stuff, like some of the early stuff I loved because sometimes they were just like quoting James Brown grooves and stuff. And so it was still the voice of the street. You were getting all the feel, but there was still a heartbeat in there. And now when I listen to the more modern stuff, and I'm not saying you got to sample the old school players for me to like it. You know, for instance, a young MC Fresh or whatever his name, a young MC when he did that Bust a Move. That's Chad Smith from the Red Hot Chili Peppers playing drums on that track. So it's got a heartbeat. There's a real drummer and a real bass player, and even though it's rap stuff, R&B, there's a little heartbeat in there. And I think that some of that gets lost for me as a consumer when I hear, you know, the wave of a lot of modern pop.
Mechanized stick.
Yeah, you know, like when you had when you first had a lot of the Britney Spearsy stuff coming online, where it was more about, you know, selling a look than it was selling a sound. You know, it's like the look was more important than what you were hearing. Because, you know, she looks great, but I don't necessarily want to hear those tunes. So, and I'm just using that as a, you know, this, like I said earlier, I almost wonder, is this the Grandpa Simpson in me coming out like, oh, the new stuff? But then again, I'll hear a new record by D'Angelo, or I'll hear.
I love D'Angelo.
Yeah, and so there's a lot of.
That's as pure as it can get.
Absolutely.
A very solid percussive beat and a bass line and a voice like his.
Yeah.
And maybe some samples.
And
but
there's.
It's just inspiring
heartbeat,
to listen to that stuff, man.
It gives you the same feel the first time you hear Marvin Gaye, or you hear, you know, where you have world-class players playing world-class songs, you know, just produced beautifully, and there's just something about. I think it's why Bruno Mars had such a big moment, because he's got real players. Like those tracks are all cut with guys and
musicians. That they paid money to
that
perform.
really know how to make it go, and it gives it a human feel that I think we miss sometimes in music.
We can.
I'm not saying all, and the thing I just say to tell people is it almost feels like it's flip-flopped for me. Like what now? When I was a kid, I hated the underground scene because it felt like an excuse to be a cruddy player. Like they had this stuff called lo-fi when I was real young on campus.
I remember.
All the punk bands and stuff. And I always just thought it was an excuse to be a crappy player. See, that's the thing, being raised in a family where your mom's an opera singer and your dad's a jazz fiend. I got there's got to be something in there. I don't know. It's just hard. Like the punk thing just bounced right off me. And I'm not just poo-pooing punk. That's not what this is about. I'm just saying I just never got it. For me, it was never my bag. Like the Sex Pistols.
How did it hit you? How did punk hit you? Was it just like a?
I just despised it from the word go. I knew what they were trying to do. I loved the energy, and every now and then you'd find that band that managed to be decent musicians and still have the energy. And those were the couple of punk bands that I would like. But there was a whole gaggle of them that. I appreciate the energy and the get behind it and the commitment to the thing. It just wasn't my cup of tea.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? It just wasn't for me. And it was, now that I look back years later, it's to me because the songs weren't memorable. You know, the songs just didn't reach out and grab me. The songwriting was very rudimentary at best.
They're emotional in a
they're very
in an
emotional,
angry sort of way.
Yeah,
or in an angstish type of attitude.
And you know
but that's punk, man.
It's punk, and it's also
but that's not where I live either.
It's the same reason that a lot of real angry rock bounced off me. When, you know, like when the Anthrax, Slayer, that era first came around. I'm just saying I'm not saying anything about those bands.
Yeah, and you're not like
I'm not poo-pooing the movement.
You're not dissing punk. You're not dissing.
I'm not dissing any of it. It just wasn't.
It's just you're expressing
what
you
appealed to
relate
me. Correct. Yeah, like I don't want to drive anybody away
this
from
episode's about you. I just want to clarify that because people are going to say, "Oh, Matt doesn't like punk." He's like, well, he might not like it, but this is what you're trying to do is say, "Hey, this is what I'm about," right?
For me, this is just what appeals to me. Yes, I'm not poo-pooing the punk thing as a movement, but to me, it always felt like the kid in class who put his hand up nonstop and said, "Hey, hey, hey, But then when you called on them, they didn't have anything to say. You know, it's like when the Beatles went, hey, 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 they'd give you a record that'd blow your mind because the songwriting was so good. And so for me, it doesn't come down to just musicianship, although I like to have a certain modicum of ability. But I embrace the simple bands when they're clever. The word clever is the word I use more often than anything to describe the simple music AC/DC. I have no issues with simple music. I love AC/DC. Back in Black's one of my favorite records ever because it's clever. The turnarounds, the way they get from one place to another.
Just the way they produce that.
The way the production is amazing.
Oh, God.
But the songwriting is clever.
Straight up.
And yes. And so for me, that's just been the common denominator.
That's where it's at.
For me. Like that to me is like I've been around enough musicians who if you sit with a metronome and your book and work on your arpeggios, you can become a technician. My problem is once you've got the world's largest vocabulary, are you going to tell me a story I want to hear? And I think that's where a lot of the vocabulary becomes a waste of time. Because if the songwriting doesn't catch it, then you can shred to your end of time. You can be the most shreddy of all the shredders, the most amazing guitar player of all time. But I guarantee you 100 years from now, when you compare how many records Yngwie Malmsteen has sold compared to how many records George Harrison sold, I think it's going to be obvious who left a bigger mark. And it wasn't because George could shred. And I'm not poo-pooing Yngwie.
Right.
Those guys are amazing technicians.
They are.
And there's a lot to be learned. And then you come across guys like the guy who wrote Cliffs of Dover. He's been out with Johnson. Eric Johnson. Yeah. So there's a guy who can shred, but also write a tune that you might want to hear more than 2 times.
Yes.
So they're out there. Adrian Blue's another guy, another one of my favorites who, he's done everything from the Talking Heads to King Crimson to his solo stuff to, of course he first got picked up by David Bowie. Of
all people.
Yeah. So he's another one of those guys that can play with King Crimson and like play crooked with the best of them and then turn around and play with Bowie and understand what that gig gets. But he has the chops to play any of it. So he's operating at a certain level. And so for me, and that's just my quirky. And I think it's also kept me from enjoying some music. I know that about myself. I know that there's it doesn't have to be chopsy. It just has to operate at a certain level. It has to have a certain...
It has to hit you emotionally.
It has to hit me emotionally, but I'm talking about actual technical ability.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like it's got to be 1 or 2 rungs up from the very bottom for me to enjoy it. Like if it's obvious you can't tune your guitar or stay in time, I'm probably not going to want to listen to the songs that you're writing. So that's just a really opinionated, long-winded Grandpa Simpson moment.
There's so much insight there, though, man.
But that's just me as a player, and I've told people, I think I've missed out on some stuff because I didn't have the right. And I've never walked into an audition I've never auditioned for anything I didn't want to do. So it's not like I carry around this attitude, I'm only letting this out because we're yakking. You know what I mean?
It's all good, man.
So I think that growing up with the mom that I did, like I said, getting back to that.
Yeah, so where in Columbus was that, Matt?
I grew up in Bexley, Ohio.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, I grew up out on the east side, and we were in what you'd look at as the working class. Like we were 2 kids to a bedroom, Dad drove an Oldsmobile. We didn't live on Parkview. Okay. There are parts of Bexley where there's lots of big money. We were in what you would consider more like the... but it was a great school district, great music program, and the street that I lived on, Seneca Park Place, right in the center of Bexley, there were several families on the street who were professional musicians.
That's amazing.
And so, like in the Columbus Symphony Orchestra, and my mom, I grew up around a group of people. For instance, we had a 4th of July float every year in the Bexley 4th of July. And we had enough musicians on the street that we had our own band.
That's awesome.
And I remember Glenn Harriman sitting on the side of our float, and we were doing I think it was a baseball themed float. And so we're working out arrangements. He's like, okay, what do we got today? He had his daughter on bass. I was playing euphonium. My mom was playing piano. Glenn was playing trombone probably. And so he's looking around, he's looking at the instruments, and on the spot, he arranges for everybody with a pencil and staff paper. He just writes out the parts to take me out to the ball. Like on the side of the float, 5 minutes before the thing starts, goes out, there's your part.
Your part.
There's your part, yeah. Coda, play that twice, yada, yada, yada.
And you're on the drums?
I was playing euphonium.
Euphonium?
Yeah, baritone horn.
Got it.
I played that from 4th grade all the way through college. And
Nice.
so I had a tonal background, and Glenn's son, Tommy Harriman, was one of the finest drummers this town's ever produced. Went on to play with Kenny Loggins and stuff. Lives out west now. So I grew, and so he had a band here in town called Five Mighty People for years, and he was an amazing local musician. And he's now a very successful songwriter out on the West Coast. He's done stuff for Baywatch, the TV show. He's written music for that and stuff.
Nice.
So he's gone on to have quite his own career.
And this is a Seneca Avenue.
This Seneca Park Place, another guy on the street, and he made his living playing the drums. And so I grew up in this, and so I never wanted to be a rock star. The idea that you could work as a player in music and do the thing I loved, like making it with the Rolling Stones, I just could care less. Like it was never even part of the equation. Like if I ever do, great. But that wasn't the target that I was shooting at. You know, that was never the target for me.
It was the journey that was
It was about
appealing.
becoming a good player and playing music that I loved and writing music. Like early on, I had a writing partner named Rick Fisher, the band Amy and the Boys I was telling you about. We wrote all our own stuff. And he was a pretty good songwriter. And so literally from high school on, I've always been involved with songwriting. As a drummer, I think it's a brilliant way to exercise your brain and keep involved. Because after a while, learning cover tunes can be only so rewarding.
Right.
I love coming up with my own stuff. Like I've spent my own lifetime learning all this vocabulary. Now it's my turn to try to tell a story with it. And so for me, in the last 10 years, I was just laughing with a friend of mine a couple of days ago saying, if you had told me as I approached 63 years old that I would be as happier now musically than I've ever been. You know, if you'd told me that 40 years ago, I'd be like, you're nuts. You're crazy. But right now, I have stuff on my agenda the only stuff I have on my agenda is the stuff I want to be a part of.
That's awesome.
For a huge portion of my life, you know, you're working in wedding bands, you're doing whatever just to make ends meet. You got to pay the gas bill, you know, whatever.
And you're doing it with music, right?
I've done it with music.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so luckily, now I'm in a spot where, you know, I'm financially in a pretty good spot. So I can now take my later years and just do it. You know, I mean, I still take on session work with friends and do stuff that I'm not even a full-time member of. But once again, it's that creative. I love the parameters. I try to tell people it's like this. If you're a country artist, you're writing a song. I need a plumber to come in and do the plumbing.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
When you get called to do sessions the way I do locally, you know, you're just a guy working cheap who they know will come up with a clever part. But it's kind of like if it's a pop tune, you know, there's kind of certain parameters you work within. So how clever can I make my plumbing in that house and stay within the parameters and not overplay, not play something stupid just because you want to show off or, you know, I've been blessed with the fact that I have like no chops. So I'm never trying to show off for anybody.
Stop.
It's about the groove with me. Like if I can make it feel right, my job's done.
Serve the song.
Serve the song. Absolutely. My favorite players in the world. Like I love the guys that know when it's time to play 2 and 4. If it's 100 bars in a row, like when you hear Tempted, the song Tempted by Squeeze.
And it's not
Any
a
other
drum machine.
groove and that song would suck. You know what I mean? That's what that song needed. And he played that perfect little beautiful gem of a drum part. You know, Stewart is a great example of that. Like you listen to Every Breath You Take, their biggest hit, and he just plays dead straight.
Yep.
But he also could write those amazing, wonderful parts. And
and deal with Sting.
And yeah, I mean, of course, like every band out there, they have their personality. One of the things I get a kick out of is when you hear an interview or you read an interview with a guy. It's like, we broke up because of musical differences. In my life, I have found that 90% of the time, it's not musical differences.
Attitude.
You know, it's the guy in the band you're on the road with who, this is a real story. I was traveling with a band, and one of the guys in the band would take a shower every night before the show, and he'd throw his wet towel on my bed. It was almost like
he's trying to piss you off.
Yeah. And it just was like, and that's the kind of stuff, you do that 22 times, and I have to sleep in a wet bed 10 nights in a row because you're an idiot. That's the kind of stuff that, when a band's living together in a van pulling a trailer.
Did you say something to the guy, Matt?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you did?
Yeah.
Oh, it only made it worse, though, didn't it?
Well, we finally solved it by, I'm not rooming with you. We're flip-flopping, And we got through the rest of the time our together without, too much problem. But that's the kind of stuff that, when people are on the outside looking in, they have no idea what it's like for that guy playing at that little club in Brooklyn or New Jersey or wherever. If he's from Ohio, they have no idea what it took for him.
It's stuff like dealing and tolerating a wet towel every night.
Every night. And on top of that, in today's music market, you're probably not getting paid anything. The way that they have found to get rid of cash flow for musicians, I mean, think about it. I remember having Scott Steinecker, the guy that started Promo West. We're not best buddies. I'm not going to make it sound like that, but I've known Scott because I've worked for him at Bo Diddley shows and stuff over the years, so he knows who I am. I knew Scott when he first got started, way back when he first bought the Agora and turned it into the Newport and stuff. I was already playing there. So I met him, and I remember having a conversation with him about 15 years ago, maybe. And it was the beginning of the digital era. Like, it was really taking hold. 2010, 2011, Napster, downloads, iTunes, yada, yada, yada. It was changing the whole landscape. And he was talking about how so many of the patrons coming to his shows were complaining about ticket sales. Well, the problem is obviously there's no money in the records. All the money the guys used to make with the records, the whole thing's flip-flopped in my lifetime. Like, it used to be, you went on tour as the advertisement to buy the record. They'd come to your show, and hopefully you'd turn on enough of the crowd, they'd go to the record store the next day and buy whatever.
Sell out.
Yeah, whatever you had. And now it's the exact opposite. They give the records away for free on Spotify. Remember, U2 loaded one on phones some years back? If you bought a new iPhone or whatever, it was automatically on your phone. Oh. And it was basically an advertisement to come buy the ticket. But that's why tickets now are so expensive, because the players have no other way to accumulate enough wealth to retire. The thing that used to be waiting for them at the end of the rainbow is gone because there's no royalties from what they call in the contracts mechanical sales. Mm-hmm. They'll call it mechanical sales. And there's no money in it. There's just nothing there. And, now vinyl's brought back a little bit. They're selling more vinyl than CDs now because it feels kind of,
It feels nostalgic.
Yeah, it feels, and bespoke. Like, yes. It's a crafted thing. You're bringing home this. The thing I love about it is the image area. When we were kids, you'd buy the record, like the Beatles would have like a fold-out record, like Magical Mystery Tour with big pictures, and you'd put the record on, and you'd had that whole
browse,
experience.
Read it.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember when CDs, it's like, okay, the image area went down to that, and then you'd have the fold-out. So you still got kind of it. But then when it went to thumbnails on iTunes, it's like, I remember like,
game over.
Why bother doing the art? Just give me this. Like, I can't, like. So
press the arrow right. That means play.
I mean,
and then, you know what? That's interesting.
There's nothing to hold. There's no.
What blew my mind with music too, and changes around the same age bracket that
the era,
right? The era is back then. Every car that we bought, my brothers and I, my dad would help us like carve out the back of the windows and put our
6x9s,
Marantz 5-way speakers back there and subwoofers weren't even a thing back then.
No, 6x9s were the jam.
You had 6x9s that were like retrofitted into your $500.
Sit there with a jigsaw digging out.
No shit.
Yeah,
just
I remember
that metal. My dad's like helping us do this stuff. All of our cars have these big ass power boosting.
Oh,
graphic
you had the EQ and
with the lights and everything in your like 68 Malibu or whatever the hell it is, and then you're just loud as shit driving down the road. That was the shit.
That was the nizzle.
But then folks born in the 90s, they got these little pods in their ears, man. I think it's a very personal experience. It's very quiet.
And
I'm like, dude, where's the bass?
Yeah.
They're just like, it's my quiet. I mean, it's just very personal, whereas back in the 70s and 80s, man, it was very social and everyone's grooving to the old school waves hitting your legs. And,
we had a guy at my
bumping and
high school who
grinding.
had a Cutlass. It was a convertible, and I can remember to this day him pulling up to like halftime parties or after football parties, and he'd have the convertible top down with the 6x9s blaring some Molly Hatchet or whatever was popular, and you could hear him from 2 miles away. It's like, oh, van's on his way. So it
doesn't fly today.
It's not the same. It's
Doesn't
not
fly.
the same. It's just, it is a different consumer market completely. We mentioned before the podcast started, I like to travel. I'm not going to get into a whole travel thing. That's a different world. But one of the things I found fascinating talking about the thing you were just talking about is when I go to airports, I'm amazed at how many people they wear their sound canceling headphones, all of them. It's like they don't even want to be in the
social.
It's really odd. Like if you grew up in an era when not everybody had stuff stuck in their ears 24/7,
or in their hand.
Yeah. Oh, that phone thing. Don't get me started. It's like, geez, can you do? I had a funny moment. I'm flying overseas once, and I look around the plane. We're 3-4 hours into the flight. They always dim the lights, and for the overnight part of the flight, and so it's in that part of the flight. I just can't sleep on planes, so I'm always the guy watching movies the whole flight. And thank God they all got the nice screens. You just plug in your earbuds and let's watch the movies. So I'm watching movies and I get up to use the restroom. And as I'm making my way down the plane aisle to the bathroom, I'm just looking around. You're observing. The plane's dark, and I'm amazed at how many people, instead of using the big screen in front of them, they're using their phone. They got a phone on a prop-up thing on their little tray table, and it's like they're using an image area that's 3.5 by 5.
Yes.
And it's like, there's free a 19-inch high def monitor right in it's kind of like I don't even can you even see the guys on there? So it's just interesting. It's like they'd almost rather consume the same content on their own little screen because it's the world they're used to. I think
because they might get texted by somebody at the same time.
Oh, so they can
multitask.
Oh, yeah,
in the middle of a movie.
Yeah, but see that's. Give you an idea, this is how weird I am. My cell phone, this thing, it's with me because I just didn't leave it in the car. But it's in the car. I just leave it in the car.
Yeah.
I'm in a neighborhood I didn't know, so I just
maybe you had trouble. Did you get to the visitor a lot?
Yeah, everything's great. Yeah, there was no problems there. But it's just I was just like when I go to a social event, I don't bring my phone in from the car. Like when I go to a gig. My phone's in the car. And I can't tell you how many times I felt like the odd guy out because
everyone
just
they
live
have
on the
set
things.
List on there. They have the key changes.
Another thing that irks me, and this is just between you and I and the podcast.
Well, that means all.
I know.
People.
I'm just being silly.
You can express yourself.
Okay.
It's your.
It's an opinion. I despise the modern use of iPads on stage. I understand that if you're like subbing the gig. But what I'm talking about, I'm not talking about the guy who doesn't know the songs yet. I'm talking about the guy who knows the songs.
Yeah.
You've been the singer in this band for 14 years, and you have done that Bad Company song since you were a kid. Do you really need to stand and stare at your iPad? And I think the reason I don't like it is it's not that you're using the iPad. When I learn new songs, if I'm a little edgy on the lyrics, I write them out with a Sharpie and I put them somewhere on stage so I can read them. And I'm not saying that's better or worse. You're doing the same thing with an iPad. My problem is that if you never pull the training wheels off the bike, you never learn how to ride the bike. And you're also a much crappier entertainer when you're staring at your iPad. And I have gone out and seen entertainers who never look at the audience now. Well, entertainers in quotes. Working musicians. And it comes to a point where, if you're a dude doing a solo act and you're using your iPad to do songs you don't do all the time, I totally get that. And if you're in the
requests a tune,
yeah, exactly. See, and so I'm not like anti-iPod, but what I'm saying is I'll watch a guy work at the same crowd with the same songs that he's been doing for 20 years, and he's got an iPad in front of him and he stares at it. For me, at some point you got to let the thing off the leash. Like you got to interact with the people, and it's the same. problem I have with the cell phone generation as a whole is I'm sitting at 15th and High in my van. Okay, perfect story. A couple of years ago, sitting at the red light, I'm getting ready to turn right onto 15th. Light's green the other way, people in the crosswalks. So I got my foot on the brake. I reached down to change the radio station. You know, yeah. I feel my van gets bumped. I'm like, whoa. And I was nowhere near the crosswalk. I'm behind that big wide thing before the crosswalk. Some kid had walked out of he's staring at his phone. He walked out of the crosswalk and walked right into my van. And then looks up at me and is like, oh, sorry, man. Like, it didn't hurt my van. It's an old Ford E150. It's like, good luck hurting that. But he just blinked into my van. And then he's like, oh, sorry, dude. And then back on his phone, back across the thing at the busiest intersection on campus. And I went to that school, man. I remember dodging cars. I'm thinking, I wouldn't trust the folks around here to drive. So it was just, and I wonder once again, is this the Grandpa Simpson in me? Because I have a cell phone.
No,
I just don't live on it.
No, don't be. You can't be thinking that way.
And it was just an odd moment. Like, wow, dude, you walked into a car.
You did. I know.
And I just see it all the time. I was playing at the Thirsty Ear right before it closed and turned into Woodlands years ago. And it was right at the beginning of the smartphone era, 09, 2010 maybe. You know, they were just coming on the scene. And anyway, it was a nice place to bring a date. You know, it was kind of a supper club. They had good food and all that stuff down there. And I'm on stage with L.A. Allman. I was telling you earlier.
Oh,
yeah.
right.
So I'm off the road with the gods. This is probably 2000, 2001, something like that. And we're playing a show there, and it's a date night. You know, a bunch of girls, and everybody's face is lit up by a phone. Two people sitting across from each other looking at their phone on a date. You know, as the lights were down, you could see the glare of the phone on their face. And I'm just looking around. It was like an arrow to the brain. Like, wow, half the people in here aren't even paying attention to us, and they're not paying attention to each other. They're looking at their phone. It's almost like, are you guys texting instead of talking? Is that what, you know, is that how this works now?
Friend, save me from this date.
It just seems so strange to me. Like,
It's an odd
I'm going to go on a date
dude.
with you, but I'm not really going to interact.
I'll
It's
take
kind
you
of
to a show, but we're not going to watch it.
Yeah, it was the weirdest. Like, I just didn't like. I just thought, wow, am I that weird?
No.
Am I that disconnected? Like, and it's not because I'm not tech savvy. I'm online all the time. I'm out with my MacBook. You know, all the studios are all computers now. It's not that the tech freaks me out. It's the way it's changing behavior.
It's the it's the non-social behavior.
Yeah.
In a social setting that doesn't compute.
My daughter was telling me she's in her early 40s. She was telling me that in her age bracket, who kind of grew up before cell phones but were young enough that they grasped on pretty early. She says with a lot of her friends now, if you go out to dinner, they'll sit at a table and they'll put all the phones down, face down, and the first one who picks up the phone's got to pick up the tab.
Good. That's smart.
I think it's brilliant.
I do. I mean, you know, and I'm glad to hear that because it's crazy.
It is. It's just an odd thing when you're at a concert and you can't see the stage because everybody's holding up their phone. It's very like
because they're recording it.
Well, they're just trying. It's almost like they have to document every moment of their life. Maybe they're getting a selfie, maybe not. I don't know. But it's just like, why don't you just absorb the moment? Like, live in the moment. Like, it's hard for me. I don't mind you taking a snap and then moving on. Like, I get that. But the idea that you're just going to hold the phone up and, you know, so you can put it on YouTube later or whatever.
The whole show.
Or you'll just be there, you know. It's just an odd thing for me. Having grown up for 2/3 of my life pre-cell phone and now watching it. And it's one of the reasons I'm so restrictive on my use of the thing. I just don't want to change my behavior.
You don't have to.
Well, I'm not. But but the reason I'm being so weird about it is I get flack.
From who?
Well, just like buddies who know me. Like,
wow,
like, dude, I can never get a hold of you. Like, I text you. It's like, just go on Facebook, man. I'm on there 5 times a day.
That's one thing that I will do is I will adapt to a person's communication style.
Well, and
you told me, you hit me up on Messenger. I remembered that.
Yeah.
That's how we made things happen.
My take on it is, in order to be in today's music world, you have to have an online presence. And so Facebook is my online presence. So I just I use that to
leave
push
that.
gigs, and I post my travel pictures, and so that's my one. But I'm not on like Twitter or all the other. I just do the one, and hopefully it spreads where it's got to go. But there are actual promoters and club owners where if you're not pushing your shows on Facebook, they'll pull you aside and go, "Hey, can you know?" And I get it.
Yeah.
Because it used to be when I was growing up, you did posters. We had a budget in the bands I was in to do posters on campus. You would spend, if you had a gig Friday night, starting Tuesday afternoon, you'd go to Kinko's and print off
3,000
a
flyers.
bazillion flyers, however many you could afford.
And buy boxes of staples. Staple
And you had your Archer staple gun, and you'd walk up and down campus, and the telephone poles
Hammer it.
were just coated with the things. And you would do that Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. You would go out again, because the next day, all your stuff would be covered, so you'd have to again. But that was the way you got the news out for the gig. You'd also put posters at the venue. But as far if you were playing Ruby's or Bernie's or any of the campus gigs at the time, that's how you got stashes, whatever. That's how you got people to your shows. That's how people got the word out. Pre-cell phone, pre-digital, pre-web, pre-computer, So it was a cheap way to get the word out. Nowadays, Facebook is that. That's how you do your, hey, we're playing it, blah, blah, blah. And I do the same thing. You have to. But, yeah, it's just, in that way, Facebook's just replaced posters for me. Now I don't have to go stand in the cold with a stapler. So I totally appreciate it for what it does for me. It makes it easier. I can just invite the friends, go through your list of, and like my buddy, some of my friends are like, they don't like the rock stuff, but they'll like the jazz things. I'll invite those.
Yeah.
So I literally am very selective about where I send my invites because I have friends that I don't want to torture. Like I have buddies of mine who like jazz primarily, so they're not going to want to come see, like when I was playing in Razor Bliss with those guys, they're not going to want to come see a hard rock band. It's just not their thing. So I try to, I'm one of the old guys operating in the new world. I'm an analog man in a digital world. And,
well, can you take us through some, you've been in a lot of projects, a
Sure.
lot of bands, but can you take us through maybe kind of the highlights, some of the ones that people, you might feel fondly about?
When the Amy and the Boys was the first named band around here that kind of left a mark. The band after that people would remember would be, I was in a dance band called Leftover Funk. And at the same time, I was in a fusion band, progressive thing called Drums and Wires. And both those bands fulfilled different things. The funky thing, I grew up listening to Rufus, Chaka Khan, all that kind of stuff, love playing that stuff. And so that band fulfilled that little niche in my world. And then Drums and Wires was way more crooked, way more Crimson, Genesis, that kind of thing. So that fulfilled those niches. And then Drums and Wires was technical enough that when Mark Chatfield saw me in that band, he's like, I knew if you could play that stuff, you could play anything I'd need you to play. Because it was just, it was pretty intricate. So when he was looking for a drummer, then, of course, him and I played together with Bo Diddley, and he saw I could play straight ahead. And so Drums and Wires really helped make me in this town because if you were a player, you realized the guys in that band could play. The jazz guys liked it, the rock guys liked it. So it really kind of left a mark on the local musicians. So if I showed up to an audition or I mentioned that I had played with those guys, they'd be like, oh.
Street cred.
Like, yeah, they might take you a little more seriously.
Yeah.
And then after that, the Bo Diddley thing and the Gods thing in late 80s, early 90s, and I did the Gods through 98. And I also, right before I got married, I was lucky enough to sub. Was never his full-time guy, but I subbed with George Jones, the country star.
Nice.
I had done that first record I told you about at Rome Recording with a band called Ernie Lee. I was a regional country star, and it went to like top 100. It edged onto a chart for like 2 seconds, and went away. It was a terrible song. It was awful. But I was a kid, and it was the first gig I ever had that paid the rent. I quit my day job. Whoa, 19 years old, 20 years old, quitting a day job. What? Wow, woo. So that was cool. But then we were on the road with him, and his drummer got sick. We're out in the middle of nowhere. It's like, hey, we can't get anybody from Nashville to come out and play the gigs. This kid in the opening act's okay. Let's get him. So, because George had a real reputation for canceling back then. He was no-show George.
Really?
Yeah, he had a really bad rep in the early 80s because he was a drunk. There were nights getting him off the bus was like, good luck with that. Him and Tammy Wynette had gone through a horrible divorce, and he was in a downward phase.
Wow.
Anyway, I was just doing the gig because my band was the opening act, but they paid me enough that when I got home, I had down payment for a house.
Nice.
So,
good for you.
yeah, so that was the George, but that was just a sub thing. I was never his guy.
And how old were you then for that?
It was the summer of '83, so I was about to turn 21.
Wow.
Yeah, but I was no stellar country player. But fortunately, George's stuff is more about keeping time, and I could do that. And country, just that old school country like that. There was a lot of what they called country swing, and it was when the era of what they used to call outlaw. Outlaw was a big thing.
Yeah.
I called it country disco. A lot of it had a real four on the floor kind of thing. Boom, 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 boom. The outlaw stuff did. But anyway, so I had to learn how to play all those grooves, and the country swing stuff I always loved because it was a feel that you had to master. And I guess I got close enough to it that George had nothing to do with it. He didn't know my name. I was just the guy behind the drums. I never even said boo to George. His bass player ran the band. So I never even got to really meet the guy. But I would, and it's one of the reasons I play Gretsch drums, because I had a Ludwig Ringo kit, but the drummer in George's band had a Gretsch kit, and as soon as I sat behind him, I was like, oh, ooh, Daddy's found a new home.
Our new brand,
yeah.
right?
So as soon as I could afford Gretsch, I bought Gretsch, and I've been playing them ever since.
Oh, good for you.
Yeah, that's still,
And that brand's been with you since those days.
Well, yeah. I mean, I didn't buy them on that tour because I was a young poor. But as soon as I heard them, I started saving money right then, and it wasn't for 3 years that I had enough cash together, because Gretsch's back then there was no like student economy model. It was like you bought Gretsch or you didn't, and they were one of the few drum companies who almost never gave out endorsements. They didn't need to. They were there. Yeah, I mean, guys like Phil Collins and stuff play them to this day. Yeah, they're just a great drum. I mean, there's a million other great drums out there. You can buy it.
With you.
But they just happen to have
that's
my guy. It's just a great sound,
Yeah.
And they're a classic drum. They've been around forever. But it's the ones I play. And so, yeah, okay, so that was '83, and then I went through the Drums and Wires, Leftover Funk, Bo Diddley, played with Bo on and off between '89 and '96.
89 and 90. That's a long run with Bo Diddley.
Well, I wasn't with him all the time. What would happen is Bo didn't carry a band. So you would get hired for one-offs. And I did 3 in town and a couple others out of town with him. The last show I ever played with Bo was '96 at Ludlow's here in town.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. It was I guess that place held 1,000 people, maybe,
Ludlow's was a cool venue.
Yeah, that was a cool venue.
Was it when it was outside, or was it when it went into like a venue?
Yeah, we were inside in the venue. But I have wonderful photographs of my daughter playing catch with Bo Diddley in the alley.
Geez.
And she was 96. She would have been 13.
That's cool.
Yeah. So she was outside playing.
So
in the
cool.
little side alley there where you load in at Ludlow's, she's playing catch with Bo Diddley. And I just was like, oh, that's about the coolest thing ever. So, yeah, Bo was one of those guys. He's the nicest guy you'd ever want to meet. He was so easy to talk to. And he wore those Hager double knit slacks with a giant belt buckle, and he had the gold toe socks my dad would wear. And I remember sitting backstage, he'd have his shoes off, he'd have his feet up, big bottle of Cavassier. And he had by then he's wearing the cowboy hat with the big feather and the giant Bo Diddley
Telling
glasses.
stories? What are you talking about?
Oh, yeah, he's told a couple of great stories. The one I remember vividly, well, there's two great stories.
Story.
Yeah, 2 great Bo Diddley stories. Bo Diddley, when he was on like Chess Records way back in the day, when he was first getting his thing happening, he got screwed over by everybody. Record promoters wouldn't give you your full amount of money. If you were in the South, the promoter might give you all your money or not because you were the wrong color, all that stuff. So he'd been through the ringer. So part of his stipulation was, I don't go on stage till I've been paid in cash, in full.
Good for him.
But then he'd go and play for 2 hours straight. I mean, he's not going to, but that was just the rule. So one of the venues, I think it was Steinecker, and we're sitting backstage, and Scott comes back. He's like, it's time. Come on. Time to go. Bill's like,
pay me.
He made him go get the money first. And at the time, he had a fanny pack, and he stuffed his money in the fanny pack, and off we go. Well, during the show...
Cash. Paid cash?
Paid cash. Big pile of 20s and 50s. Here you go. Here's your money. And he made like $3,000 himself every show.
Don't lie.
So he's like, yep, give me them. So he got the money. Off we go. We're on stage playing. Bo Diddley breaks a low E string on the guitar. That's rare. They usually break the little thin high one. But he was such a rhythm guy.
Just beat it.
He just beat it until it broke.
Boom.
So he's got that square guitar, and he just kind of turns to the band and says, hey, guys, keep the groove going. Whatever groove it was we were doing. And so we just keep on going, and Mark Chatfield or Kevin Oliver takes a solo, and we keep the thing going. He gets a string out from his fanny pack. Well, while he's got the fanny pack open, Chatfield sidles over to me, and he gets my attention with his eyes. And he looks down to the fanny pack, and he's doing the thing where he's trying to get you to look down at the fanny pack during the show.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, okay.
Playing.
And I look down. Well, he must have had 4 nights of receipts in his fanny. I mean, when he's unzipped it, it popped open. There was so much cash in it. And he was trying to find the low E string amongst the 9 million bills that were in his fanny pack. So he gets the low E string, puts it on the guitar, full volume. Bow, 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 bow. Like, no tuner. Like, Bo doesn't carry a tuner. He plugged right into a Fender Twin.
To a low E and
he brought it up to a low E, and then just like, here we go. And the very first time I played with him, of course, nervous, went out and bought all the records, learned all the grooves. I'm not going to show up not knowing my stuff. And he was supposed to show up for sound check, and we were going to learn all of his endings the way he does it live.
Right.
Great, let's do that. Doesn't show. Too late. I don't know. Flight was late. Who knows what it was? All I know is we're walking on stage, sold out show at the Agora, Newport by then. And it's my hometown. All my family's there. It's like, I don't want to drop the ball in front of these folks especially. So, hey man, as we're literally getting ready to walk on stage, I asked him, how do we start?
Yeah.
And he had those glasses that made his eyes look, they were the kind that magnified your eyes so they look like. And he just turns to me and he goes, you know how to play Follow the Leader? I'm like, yep. He goes, follow me. And so he would literally start every song with the rhythm, and they'd turn around like, you got what I'm throwing down? It's like, yeah, I got that.
We're in.
We're good.
Yeah.
So the whole
cool.
show, yeah. And it was really fun because you were talking to me earlier about showing up and playing songs like just on the fly.
Oh, yeah.
And so imagine doing that with Bo Diddley in front of
sometimes.
2,000 people in your hometown. I don't even know what songs he's going to call. And he had a record out. He had gotten another later record deal that nobody remembers. It was on Triple X Records out of L.A. or somewhere on the West Coast. But he had these songs that I'd never heard them, so he just starts playing them, and you just had to like make up a part on the fly. We could all go back and hear, I'm going to tell you how it's going to be. Bump, bump, bump. Boom, boom. You can go and learn those records because you can find the recordings. I didn't even know.
I had no reference.
He's like, oh, yeah, we're going to be doing about a third of my new record tonight. I was like, okay.
We are?
It was Bo Diddley. You just got to find the groove. But it's like, that's putting you on the spot. Like, does he want this double time, half time? Like,
Follow the Leader.
Yep. You just never know.
Good for you, though, man.
Yeah.
You did it, right?
It was exciting and scary as heck all at the same time. You know what I mean? It's like,
That's where you stretch.
That's where you stretch, and yeah, man, it was. And he was a great entertainer. He was such a great entertainer. He just knew how to do that, and it's just So getting to play. He's classic, man. He's one of the original guys. Him and Chuck Berry and Little Richard. Those guys all got it started. And the funny thing was another great story about Bo. He always felt a little slighted because he had a record in '55 called "I'm a Road Runner, Baby." Boom, boom, doo, 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 doo. And the Beatles did their homage when they did "Drive My Car," and they went beep, 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 yeah, because that's on the Bo Diddley. He does a version of that, but he always felt like that's the first rock and roll song, not Little Richard.
Oh,
because Little Richard, '57 is when his records came out. And Bo always gets left off the list. They always say it's Little Richard and Chuck Berry. But boom, boom, doo, 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 doo. Roadrunners, to me, feels as rock and roll as anything Chuck ever did.
That was pre any of that.
And it was 2 years before any of that.
Wow.
So he always kind of felt like he got left out of the car. He doesn't make a big deal out of it, but I remember him mention that. Somebody backstage, somebody was asking him something, and I overheard him.
That's interesting to know.
Yeah. And
that he really felt that way.
Yeah, I mean, he just kind of felt like he wasn't one of those guys that cared about the spotlight, but I think he felt like he got left out of the conversation.
Yeah.
I think that was more about what that was about with him.
Yeah.
But yeah, he was a fascinating guy because he was still down to earth. He lived outside of Orlando in a double wide trailer, with his name over his gate.
Lived his life.
He lived his life. He was a happy guy, And my mom got in touch with his wife somehow, and she got Christmas cards from Mrs. Diddley, and she would call her Mrs. Diddley, and I'm like, Mom, his real name isn't Diddley, but
stage name.
I got it. Yeah, it was a stage name. I think his real name was like Harold McComb or something. And but anyway, it's just one of those moments of, Mom, his name's not. Mom and Dad sent me a T-shirt that says "I know Diddley."
And you did.
And I did. Yeah, that's one of those.
Cool.
That's one of those things that the first time I got to play with him a couple more times, but yeah, that was one of the big moments. And I wish it was during the cell phone era because I have like 2 pictures of the whole.
Wow.
Because it was 1989.
But
I
the
think.
alley shot's probably the money.
I have an alley shot with. Oh yeah.
With your daughter.
Yeah.
That's just great.
Yeah. That's something I'll never forget.
Phenomenal.
And I do have a couple of pictures of me. Like you can see me on stage with him. So it's like, because every now and then if I'm traveling or people ask, they find out you're a musician, and if they want to know if you played with anybody famous. So I usually tell them Bo and stuff like that because people know. But it was such a tiny part of my career that it doesn't feel.
So you did that, but then so after Bo Diddley's,
and then Mark drugged me into the Gods pretty quick, and I did the Gods primarily between '91 and '98. Had some cover bands I'd play when I was in town, Lovehead with Mark and those kind of things. But then the original stuff, when I got back off the road. When that band was done, and we wrote some songs with that band, but that really wasn't where my heart was all the time. As much as I loved that gig, that's not really who I am as a guy, all the time. So I was able to get back into the stuff with Gorsuch. I started playing with Scott in the early 2000s. Did 3 records with Scott between 07 and 017-ish, something like that. Did 2 records with Quinn Fallon with Los Gravediggers. Did 2 records with a band called Razor Bliss, 07 and 2010, Tommy Caradonna.
Did you tour?
I mean, we traveled. I wouldn't call it touring. We played out of town, but it wasn't like touring. But, we were able to get one of those songs was used by Harley Davidson for some of their advertising. We had a song on one of those records called Brand New Creature that they used for a rollout of new models. Tommy's a really good writer. I still am pretty proud of this, especially the second record. Comedy of Errors was the first one, and the second one, though, is the one. Comedy of Errors was kind of half recorded, and that was one of those records that I came in and replaced the drummer that was on the recordings. And the drummer that was on the recordings was really good. It was Glenn Campbell's drumming. But he just didn't have the feel Tommy was looking for.
Yeah.
And so that was one of those records where half of the record was done. And so I had to go into Joe Veers when he was working for John Schwab. We actually did that first thing, I think, at Schwab. And we had to put the tracks under pre-existing tracks, and that's some of the hardest work. I've done that now for a couple people over the years. They get done with the record and they just don't like the drum tracks on it, or just whatever.
And they want it a certain way.
Yeah, they want it either a certain way, or they just can't make the sounds they have on the recording work. Sometimes it's that, but it's usually the feel isn't what they were looking for. And the thing with Razor Bliss, it was very 9 Inch Nails. So it was a very driving, it was like industrial stuff, very 9 Inch Nails. And so
is that a natural style for you?
No, and that was the joy of that band. Is that once again, it pushed you. It pushed me because everything was to a click. Every song of the whole show except 1 or 2 was to a click. And I had to play to the click because there were backing tracks, little bits that we had done with keyboards and stuff in the studio that we couldn't cover live, or sound effects like a harp or something that we didn't want to have to deal with a real one live, because who's got money to do that? And in the world of computers, who needs to? So we did that, and that was a very challenging band because I'm playing full metal. I mean, as far as like drummer, you're physically you're going at it.
Yep.
And I'm having to sing background vocals nonstop on every song and play to a click, and I'm playing double kick for the first time and only time in my life that I played double kick. So I'm wrestling with new patterns in the feet, singing, playing to a click. There was a lot that could go off the rails. And so that band was like, man, as soon as we started the set till the end of the set, as much as any band I've ever been in, it was just like running a marathon. I mean, you just had to like, okay, here we go. Yeah, I mean, the very first song out of the gate was way upbeat, and it just never stopped. And the band would stick 6, 7, 8 songs together at a time. So I was the one guy on stage who never stopped. But it made for a good show. So it was totally worth it. But, yeah, and that was one of those bands that sadly after the second record, we didn't really catch. And the singer was starting to get a little, it was the only band he'd ever been in. He was a really good singer. Like he had the gift, you know, like he could have. But I think as soon as Randy realized how hard the business can be, like even if you have a really good product, it just doesn't mean you're going to get anywhere with it.
It went far. It went far.
It did pretty well.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, people who were around back then still tell me they like the second record, especially. They're like, oh, I've got it in my player right now. It's like, oh, man, you know, to me, that's the biggest compliment you can get.
Awesome.
But once again, it was the songwriting. Like, Tommy wrote some really clever songs. And the drum parts were especially hard because he had a lot of stuff where, going to get technical for a minute, where you play over the bar line. And for a drummer, we like things in sets of 4, real easy to understand. But he had a lot of stuff where you're like, huh.
Like it doesn't resolve.
It doesn't resolve until later, or it doesn't resolve where you think it would normally. Like, and sometimes those are my favorite drum parts because you have to kind of rethink what you're about
And where you are.
Yeah,
and when do you bring it back in?
When do you bring it back in, or do it? You know, like in the old school, you always got on the 1. You know, you always brought the old Parliament thing where you bring it down to the 1 every measure. But with his stuff, no, it was a different thing, and real driving. Very drum centric, very percussive. The whole thing. I mean, there was some
guitar heavy.
Yeah, it was really fun. I enjoyed the song, and I can still listen to those records and go, yeah, that was cool. The Gorsuch, and then Los Gravediggers. I did 2 records with Quinn Fallon, which is more like country rock, more like, I'm not gonna say that. It's more like Americana. Quinn is. He's a good songwriter. He had a band called the X-Rated Cowboys here in town for years. They're playing again now. A couple of new guys, a couple of the same guys from back then, but it's the same vibe. And now, of course, I'm playing with Bella Witt, and she just writes great stuff. She's a talent.
That's a great show.
Yeah. And the thing about that show, it's one of the reasons we're having a hard time catching, is it's not the kind of show you go to jump up and down. I mean, it's got some funky feels, but it's not the kind of show you go to. You know what I mean?
Okay.
It's not a fist in the air, pump it like metal kind of show.
I'm a personal fan of Bella Witt and the Fog.
Yeah, it's a cool band.
It's a very cool band.
Yeah.
It's a very cool project. I think it has great family history too.
Oh, yeah.
Bella's mother.
Kelly and I've known Kelly for 40 years.
Just a fabulous creative environment.
Yeah.
And so if I may, I mean, from my perspective, clearly an up and coming performance.
I think so.
Act. And the writing's thoughtful.
Yeah. For a girl her age,
it's incredible.
There's some world weariness to it that you usually see in people older. And
she's very special.
Yeah, and she's had some moments in her life that are tough, and she uses her writing to deal with it.
Yeah.
And so for her, it's very cathartic. And some of the best music comes from real places.
Oh, geez. Well, and I'll say that, going to a show, and I've only seen one live, but I've seen a lot of video. But, forget about the video on Facebook. Go to the show, okay? Because to your point, it's an emotional presentation of a lot of real world experience.
Yeah. Oh,
and
yeah.
That's where
she's writing about what happened.
Comes out.
Yeah.
and the vibe and the level of musicianship is a real treat.
Yeah, she's.
It really is. I mean, I'm talking about the band,
Yeah.
the whole delivery of the show. And to your point, it's not where you're going to go to party. It's where you're going to want to go and enjoy the musicianship.
Yeah,
and the vibe and just the experience.
I think it's the same kind of folks who would go see a Norah Jones show.
Yes.
You're not going to go to a Norah Jones show and jump up and down. That's not that, and there are shows for that, and they're great. And I've been in bands that do that, and they're great, and it's fun.
Yep.
But this isn't one of those things. So I think we're having a hard time kind of catching, I feel like. It's like, it's not for everybody, and I totally get that. But I just think she's writing at a level, some of the stuff she comes up to us with, and even the new stuff we're working on in rehearsal right now. There's one of the songs she just showed was at the last rehearsal, straight up brilliant. And because she just lets it flow, she's smart enough to just let it come out as it is. And I think that within that, every now and then you really find something real.
Yes.
There's a couple songs on that record that now it's her second record, but it's the first record I'm a part of. Sad Song, I'm Fine, Heaven. All three of those songs to me are. Sad Song is a straight up on the radio song. And the other two, Heaven and I'm Fine, I think are very well crafted. I use that word a lot, crafty. Just really great. They get in, they do 3.5 minutes, you get the whole feel, and it's her own thing. She sounds like her. That's not derivative, you know?
Right.
When people ask me what does she sound like, I'm like, well, it's hard because there are moments when she'll sound like Regina Spektor, or she'll sound like Norah Jones, or she'll sound like, but it's still her.
She's finding her.
She is, and the beautiful thing about her is herself has more than one voice.
Right.
And that's what I love. She's not rewriting the same song every time.
Right.
And when I met her, she was 19. And so I'm listening to these songs when her mom contacted me, because Kelly and I had been in a band years ago together. And her mom, for those listening to the podcast, her mom's a phenomenal singer in her own right.
Absolutely.
Here in town.
Absolutely.
And so when her mom contacted me, the original conversation was, she knew I used to teach drums years ago. She's like, we're looking for a drummer for this project. Do you know anybody? It wasn't, do you want to do it? It was like, I think she's, as anybody would, my kid's 20, you're 60. Let's find a guy.
Network, yeah. So
I was like, well, send me a link to the Spotify and let me hear it. Because I know some guys that do metal. I know some guys that do other stuff. And as soon as I heard it, I was like, me wants to be me. I want to do this. You know what I mean? As soon as I heard the songwriting, I'm like, oh, I know somebody who wants to do that. That would be me. And of course, I was more worried about, like, from a marketing point of view, what do we do with this old geezer, behind the drums? Well, as it turns out, she's kind of an old soul. And in fact, the word the fog means frickin' old guys.
Is it fricking old guys?
Well, I'm saying that to be polite. It's fucking old guys.
I was going to
frickin' to me sounds nicer because you could take the other one the other way.
Fair enough.
So I say frickin' old guys. And that came out of a joke one night in rehearsal, because she was at the time 19 or 20. The next oldest guy in the band is early 40s. The guitar player's 50s. I'm 60s. So we're laughing one night after we'd gotten to know each other, and this was the lineup of the band, and we're working on the stuff. During rehearsal one night, I was like, oh yeah, Bella and a bunch of frickin' old guys. She didn't say
that's it.
But she didn't say it at the spot. So the next time I'm online, I'm like, oh, she found a name for the band. We're the Fog. And I kind of thought, okay, that's an interesting name for a band.
Man.
I like that. And then the next time I see her, I was like, where did you come up with it? She goes, frickin' old guys. I was like, oh. I wasn't even putting two to two together because it was just a thing we said in rehearsal, and it got left.
The best band names are the ones that are named in rehearsal. That's awesome,
I
man.
couldn't agree more, because
That's a great story.
I've been in those bands where you sit around and go, what do we call ourselves? And those are the worst conversations, because it's always so stupid. You always come up with the dumbest stuff. The band that I was in years ago that had the name Hootie McBoob, the band had already started playing. We'd found each other and we were having a blast playing, but we would call it Mystery Stew, or we didn't have a name yet. And there were a couple of clubs who just hire us because of the guys that were in the band. Like,
Right,
hey, just
they-
come, what are you going to call it? I don't know.
reputational
Well,
yeah.
off we go.
Put down X.
Exactly. So back in the day, you would set your VCR to record shows when you were at gigs. I mean, this is how long this was ago. Pre-DVR, I think. And I was a Simpsons fan back then. And we had a house gig on Thursdays. The Simpsons were on a Thursday. So I taped to NBC or where Fox, whoever they were on. I taped their thing. I stuck in the tape, go play the gig, come home. Get home from the gig, and it's the episode where Simpson, what's his name?
Bart?
No, the dad.
Oh,
Homer.
Homer.
Homer wants to get Marge a boob job. So during the show, he's like, "Can I call you Busty St. Clair?" And she's like, "No." How about? There was a couple of names, and the last one was Hootie McBoob. And as soon as I heard it, I'm like,
Game over.
Game. And I knew the guys in the band were still awake, so I called them at like 4 a.m. I'm like, I got the band name. And so for the longest time, yeah, Hootie McBoob. And don't you know there were club owners who wouldn't put it on the marquee? There was a guy in Lancaster, the guy that owned the Tavern at the Mill, place everybody played for years. It's probably still there. We booked it. He liked all the players. He knew who he was. Like, oh yeah. And he's going, "What's the band name?" I was like, Hootie McBoob. He's like, "I can't put that on my billboard." It's like, dude, it's
Come
McBoob.
on, it's a boob.
It's boob. But anyway, so yeah, that was best band names come naturally.
Oh,
organically
absolutely.
grown. You know.
So, Bella Witt and the Fog, there's
Yeah.
so much there. We could do a whole episode.
Oh,
I'm sure.
absolutely, yeah.
What are some of the other projects that you're currently involved in, Matt, so we can keep an eye out?
Okay. Current stuff would be Bella Witt. I'm doing an organ trio. It's actually four of us, but we do
Mention
organ
that.
trio stuff called The Remedies. I have a cover band that works pretty regularly called Stop, Drop, and Roll.
Oh, I haven't seen that yet.
Yeah.
I
I like that
have an
band
eye
because
out for
a
that
lot
band.
of backup vocals. Like we do a lot of 4-part harmony stuff. So even though it's a cover band, we've really mapped out. Like when we do an Eagles tune, we learn all the backup vocals. We don't there's no, like if we're going to do those kind of gimme songs, we're going to do them better than anybody in town.
That's awesome, man.
So we do all the 4-part harmonies on Eagles when we do that stuff. And so, yeah, if we're going to do that kind of stuff, the thing I love about the cats in that band is they're all older guys, and they've all been playing around town in various very successful cover bands for years. So they know how the thing works. But the thing about this group of dudes that I love is they're all, A, super nice guys, but B, they like doing the extra work to make it as, like if there's backup vocals, we're covering them.
Who's your bass player in that band?
Alan Beavers.
Oh, my God. He's so freaking awesome.
Yeah.
I
And, he
love
subbed with Bella at Comfest.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Yeah, he this last year Mark was out of town, so we used Alan.
Did you ever look into any of the Black Owl?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Some of that material?
Ed Shuttleworth was in that band.
Oh, God.
Yeah.
I love that band.
See, and Ed's one of my, when Ronald Cole, after he quit the original lineup of the Trillionaires, he went through various and sundry versions until he found a lineup that had Ed Shuttleworth on guitar. And that was my favorite other version of Ronald because those songs were clever.
Yes.
Ed wrote some
Those
gems.
Yeah, those riffs are killer.
Killer.
And Alan was a part of that,
Yeah.
So I love that he's in Stop, Drop, and Roll.
Yeah, and he's been, Alan's been around town forever. He's got a thing called Alba Productions. He does stuff for the Columbus Crew. He's a video guy. He's just one of those guys like, for instance, if we're doing a song with backing tracks, Al's the guy that creates the backing tracks. He's got a little studio at home. He's very
Nice.
good at all that.
Able to do it.
And he'll just bring it and it's programmed and I just hit a pad and it off, So I'm working with guys that they go the extra mile is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And I love guys that treat it like
The extra mile.
we give a crap.
Yeah.
And I think that so many guys take it for granted. And I think it gives a lot of cover bands a bad name. I think it gives a lot of players a bad name. Because there's certain laziness involved, I have now that I'm older especially, I tell people if I'm going to get involved with a project, the first thing I say now is don't waste my time. And I don't say it to be a prickly pear. I say it because I only got so much time left.
How serious are you, man?
Well, man, I'm in my 60s. I don't, if I waste 4 years doing this because you're stupid, now I'm closer to 70. It's like,
Yeah.
I'm running out of time. So that's the one resource we can't make more of.
okay.
I can make more money, but
You're allowed to say that, man.
well, I didn't mean it sound bad. I'm
No,
just saying
yeah.
that
Yeah, that's where you're at.
But so now there are bands that I just I've either been in for a minute, or a band that I've played with in the past, or we were talking about people earlier that I've subbed with that I don't anymore. And some of that is at some point I kind of feel like I'm spinning my wheels. And it doesn't mean I don't like the people or whatever. It just kind of is like, this isn't going where I want to go. And I think sometimes you have to be smart enough to go and know it. When I was a guy, much younger fellow, I was real loyal. I was always the last guy in the boat looking around. Where did everybody go?
I'm not going to bail, but these guys are bailing.
Yeah,
What's
and
up?
so now I'm not the guy that bails. Like most of the bands I've been in for years.
You just won't go in if it ain't right.
But I'm just not going to,
That's good.
And
That's a good lesson, though.
I think you have to know your own, and sometimes it's like, I'm not the right tool for that job. I am not a hardcore bebop player. I just can't. And I get calls every now and then because I have a reputation. But in the jazz world, I don't, because that's not where I live mainly. I put my toe in the water, but it's,
Yep.
So I've actually turned down gigs because I'm like, I'm going to tell you right now, I'm not your guy, but here's a phone number. It's a guy that can cover the gig for you.
Good.
You know what I mean?
That's part of it.
Well, and part of it's keeping your reputation intact. I had a real moment with a friend of mine years ago who will remain nameless, but he's a semi-well-known player in this town, and I'll just leave it at that. Fellow drummer. And I recommended him for a gig for a guy here in town who's a classically known guy. He's been around forever. And he hired my friend based on my recommendation. My friend tended out to be one of those guys who doesn't always show up on time and is not always reliable. And I would get home from my gig. We were roommates at the time. And I would get home from my gig back in the answering machine days, and there'd be a call from the guy he's worked for at the club. Hey, dude. Hey, man, the gig starts in 40 minutes. Where are you? Next message. Hey, this is you-know-who again. Gig starts in 15 minutes. Where are you? Hey, man, we were on at 5. Where the are you?
Yeah. Yeah.
And that was a fairly regular occurrence until he was finally pushed out of the project because the fellow, I'm not going to drop names because I don't want to cause any rancor.
Right.
But the guy that I'm talking about is a really well-known fixture here in Columbus, Ohio. Works all the time. Like, he's one of those gigs, like, if you're his guy, you'll be working for decent money all the time. If it's your cup of tea, whether the music is or not, I'm just saying, he's a working guy. He knows how all this goes.
Right.
And my buddy, my roommate, who at the time needed the money, dude, what are you doing? And I had to sit him down and go, you're screwing up my reputation because you're my roomie. I'm trying to do you a solid, and now you're
right.
So now I'm a lot stingier with my recommendations. I have to really only recommend people who I know for sure are going to cover it, show up with a good attitude, all that stuff like you need for a normal job.
Yep.
Like I told you today when we were talking on the phone, I'm going to show up 5 minutes early.
Yeah, and you did.
And I did. And it's just the way
it works.
It's the way it works. And when you're in a situation, in the few times in my life where I'm like in a studio and I'm getting paid real money to be there, those guys, they want it done now. Time is money. If you're paying the studio $60 an hour, I got you on the hook for $100 an hour.
Yep.
Every minute is literally costing me 3 minutes,
Yep.
$3. Let's go. And I totally get that. And if you're one of those guys who shows up not having done your work, you're going to waste a lot of dollars, money.
Yeah.
Money. Let's say what it is. Yeah. And so I have friends of mine now who I rehearse with, who I'm a very business-like guy in rehearsal. Like if I realize like, okay, you don't know your part, like we'll do that one next time. Let's go to the next song. Like I don't want to sit here while you learn your guitar part. Like you do that at home.
Yeah.
And I'm not a prick about it. I'm just like, since that's not ready to go, let's move on to the next one.
Yeah.
And we'll work on that at the next, I have no issues just moving on. But the day of watching somebody learn their part at rehearsal, those days are gone with me. Like if you don't, I can always tell, like, you didn't spend any time with the record. And so those are the things that I've cut out of my life as I've gotten older. Like, a lot of friends of mine who are players part-time and stuff, they're always trying to drag me into stuff, and I can always, you always kind of have to find a nice way to be like, yeah, man, I just, because I know where this is going, and
prioritizing my time.
My time. It does. It really comes down to that again.
Your time is valuable.
I mean, to give you an idea, today before I got here, I spent 4 hours working on songs that I'm learning. When I leave here tonight, I'll go home and spend 2 hours working on songs for the horn band I'm playing with Wednesday. tomorrow I will spend the whole day working on songs. I got a dozen new tunes to learn before both Wednesday and my next rehearsal with my cover band. So I'm going to start on now instead of the day before rehearsal, because I found for me, it's that rote memorization. You play it once, you get it in short-term memory, play it again, get it in short-term memory. About the fourth or fifth time, it starts going into long-term memory.
And it's baked.
And then it's baked. And then I got that arrangement. I got that. And so now when I'm at rehearsals, I'm very much, let's move it along. You know, because all of our time is valuable. All my buddies, you know, they're in their 40s and their 50s. They got kids, wives, marriages, mortgages, day jobs, whatever. Some of us don't have day jobs, but a lot of us still have to do that. But time is valuable, you know.
Right.
Like that's the one resource, and it's an odd thing to talk about on a podcast about musicians.
Well, we don't have to talk about them.
No, I know. I'm just saying that I just feel like I'm probably going to be the least popular podcast on the planet.
No, not at all. I think what you're saying, you're explaining lessons learned.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh,
and
sure.
Some things to think about.
Well, I've gotten hired to do stuff.
Right? And
I have gotten hired. Let me give you an example. I've gotten hired to do stuff where the drummer on the track is a better player than I am. Like, I know in my gut where I am on the totem pole. I have no problem with that. I do fine. I have my happy world. Life is good. But I have asked well-known engineers, producers, promoters, people who've hired me to be parts of records, songs, arrangements, whatever. Why did you hire me? Like when it's obviously like I'm not the first guy on the list, because we knew you'd show up. We knew you'd be here. Your gear you'd be happy.
You're a reliable person.
I'm reliable, but part of it also is your personality when you're in the room with those people. If you're negative Nelly, you're going to have a hard time in the music biz because you're going to almost look for excuses why you're not getting it together. And so I think a lot of people, man, a lot of guys in the business, they need that positivity as much as, because the music business is already hard. It's already hard. So I think people like that when you can come in and like we can speed it along and laugh about it while we do it. Yeah, man, it's so weird. It's an odd. I almost feel like once again, am I Grandpa Simpson?
No,
you know?
No, you're not, man.
It's
you're someone who's done this pretty much your whole life.
I have.
And you've learned with all those opportunities, and you've come to this point. You're just and I appreciate the fact that you're sharing as much as you have, because these are insights, they're inspirations, but they're also lessons from practical.
Oh yeah.
Decades.
Well, and nowadays,
experience.
like for instance, in the old days, if you had to do your homework, let's just say, for instance, in 1982, you're in a cover band. You got to either make a cassette tape of that thing and rewind it. Nowadays, you go to YouTube or Spotify and just start the video again, or just hit replay and it'll just play 1,000,000 times. I mean, the resources now to do your homework have never been better. You know, you have access to really high-end earphones. When I was a kid, good headphones were $100 in the 70s.
Yeah.
You know, it's like you could go on Amazon and get a decent set of headphones for $30. You know, are they top of the line? No. But will they get the job done? Yeah.
Yes.
Especially if you're just learning the drum part on a song. Like I can remember as a kid, I would go and I had a turntable next to my drums in the basement. And I'd get rocking so hard that the record would skip. And so on the way home from school one day, one of the people in the neighborhood was throwing away a couch. And it had those big foam rubber cushions. And I unzipped the thing and I took the foam rubber home and I had an isolation thing for my record player. And it didn't skip anymore. But I had to solve that problem before I could play along to the record. You know, now I'm like, and as a kid, you didn't have a YouTube video of Clyde Stubblefield showing you what he played on the Funky Drummer. Now, if you're a drummer, you can go on Drumeo and some really good guy will show you exactly the sticking pattern, or the guy who actually recorded on the record has done a presentation of what he. So you can learn, like you can go right to the source now. When I was a kid, I can't tell you how many hours I spent like with a James Brown record where the drums were recorded with a mic overhead so you couldn't tell what he's doing with the bass drum. you crank up the bass on your turntable, and it's just like I still
out.
couldn't really. So you kind of had to guesstimate.
Wow.
And to this day, I'll come across a groove I've been playing since it came out, or since I started playing it. It came out way before me. But, as a drummer, you immediately gravitate to, all that cold sweat. I mean, how can you not? And, but I could, to this day, I'll like tune on a YouTube video, and Clyde Stubblefield or one of those guys, Pistol Pete Allen from Motown, or one of those guys, they'll be showing a room full of people what they played on the, dancing in the streets or whatever. And you're like, oh,
That's
like
what
you
he's
covered
doing.
it. And you remember 20 years ago when you learned that song, and you're like, oh, he's doing that with his left hand on the thing. Okay. Or he's doing a double-handed thing instead of a single-handed thing on the hi-hat, or just some little thing. And suddenly you're like, oh, and it's just like, boom, like the light shines down on you. And nowadays, like, I don't think kids today are ever going to know that, because they've got it right out of the gate, which is great for them, because they don't get it wrong the first time. They can learn the right one. And for me, it's just like now more than ever, you have access to everything you need. There are online metronomes. Like when I was a kid, the one my mom had on the piano, the one you wound up, it was never loud enough to
be useful.
You couldn't, as soon as you started playing, you can't hear that. And as a kid, what are you going to do? Buy a microphone? And I don't have money for a microphone. I can barely afford drum. I can remember breaking a drumstick was like, you would tape them together, because I don't have $8 for another pair. And the music store, I don't have a driver's license. I had to ride my bike to, whatever. So nowadays, man, I used to tell my students when I was teaching, it's like, man, you've got it. If you want to be a good player, everything you need is online. There are workbooks, there are metronomes, there are 19 million guys, from Todd Zuckerman, the guy who plays with sticks, to he's a phenomenal drummer, to Vinny Colaiuta showing you what he played on. Astounding. So you have resources now.
Video.
Yeah,
Visuals.
Think about all the videos that your buddies share. Like, if they know you're a musician, I can't tell you how many, like, look at this 3-year-old drummer from Ukraine.
Can you believe this guitar player?
Yeah. And some of them are honestly amazing, and some of them are just a kid who learned a trick. But either way, there wasn't a lot of 3-year-old guys doing that when I was growing up, because, and then you have the whole era. Now, one of the things I find fascinating is when I was a kid, that rock and roll stuff, my dad grew up in the swing era. So rock and roll. So the rule in my house was, if Dad's home, no drums. So Dad would go to the grocery store on Saturday mornings. What do? Run down to the basement, and I would literally play. And I set my drums up so I could see the window by the driveway. As soon as Dad's car pulled in, I just put, okay, I'm done. Nowadays, the dads will buy their kids the drums and set up a studio in the basement for Junior to practice. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So now you have that along with the YouTubes and the internets and the. It's like there's never been a better time to be an aspiring musician than right now. And you can also release your stuff without a record label. You can get it out there, I mean, there are some bad points to not having labels so much anymore, but the good point is we're all kind of starting at the same spot. And if you really honestly have something to offer, then you can catch online. And you might have an opportunity that a label wouldn't have given you. Yep. There's a whole bunch of musicians now that I've become hip to just because of YouTube. YouTube's like, oh, you like that old King Crimson stuff? Hey, here's a band from Buffalo right now you might dig. And bink, and all of a sudden you're like, oh, who are these guys, Guys. And it's brilliant. I think it's one of the really good points of the internet, is that stuff's literally at your fingertips all the time. And it's helped me. I can just go downstairs and, it's like, and there are times when I'm like practicing personally, just becoming a better player, where I'll just purposely find something I have no idea how to play, and there'll be some like kid in a church playing a groove, or just like, and you're just like, wow, he's 12 and he just does this one thing brilliantly.
Yep.
And it's like, well, I'm going to have to learn that one thing.
Yep.
And you would have never come across that.
You just keep learning it.
Yeah, it's endless.
Learning out there from that.
It's endless. It really is. And for me, the joy of being in my 60s is like, I've always got something to look forward to. I have friends of mine now that are grappling with retirement, and what do I do?
As am I.
Yeah,
my friends. Yeah.
But see, you have a love of music, so like you've got something.
They point that out to me.
Yeah. Oh, so they've even picked up on it.
Oh yeah.
And I have friends I have people in my family that I know that when they're retired, they're going to have a hard time figuring out what to do. Like, I love to read and travel and play music. So, like, day job would get in the way of all the stuff I want to do, you know? Whereas friends of mine who their entire identity has been, you know, I think your day job, what you do for a living ends up being a huge part of who you are.
Yes.
You
Agreed.
know, if you spend your whole life as a roofer, that's going to be
if you're doing what maps to your authentic self.
Well, no,
yes.
yeah. I mean,
all of us have had those jobs where it's not.
Oh God, no. Yeah,
but you're doing it for necessity.
And I have to say that I honestly do. You know, there's old cliches around for a reason. That old cliche about if you love what you do, you'll never work a day in your life. To me, that it actually feels kind of true.
Yep.
Because I worked at the city of Bexley as a garbage man for a while. I used to cut grass for the recreation department. Is everything okay?
I think so.
I used to cut grass, you know, so I've done all those jobs that everybody hates. And I'm not going to mention names, but there are people in my life and a certain member in my extended family who hated what they did their whole life, you know, and it was a huge portion of their conversation.
Yeah.
You know, when you would talk with them, they would let you know, I really hate what I do. I was always like, let's do something else, but whatever, you know, to each his own. But I just couldn't imagine doing something, you know, I worked as a day job for 10 years in the restaurant biz. And that I had a young child, and it's before I went on the road, and I had insurance to deal with and all that. And the only way I could do it is I had some background in the food service industry during college. I worked at the High Lie and other places.
Nice.
So I had some background.
Yeah.
And it's kept me eating real well all these years because I can cook for real. And so anyway, I worked for Ground Round running restaurants, and I hated it. You know, but I had the music that kept me like from going over the edge. Like, right. I was always playing on the weekends, and I even played weeknights and just show up tired to work back when you could still get, you know, I was young and you could do it in your 20s. But I have to say that if I was the age I am now and had done that job for all these years, for the last 35 years now, I don't think I'd be as happy.
Yeah.
I don't think I'd be as happy.
Yeah.
Like
I get that.
It's just yeah, I have friends of mine who've stayed at their job, and part of it's from, you know, they don't have the opportunity I have to go make money playing music. So this is what, you know, you got to. But there is part of me, like the ones who don't like what they do, I feel bad. I feel like I've dodged a bullet on that one, you know, because making music you know, when I quit the day job, the one thing I told myself is if the gig pays, I'm taking it. You know, I was none of this like, oh, I don't play that kind of music. Nope. You know,
that's another good.
Well, and it forces you out of your comfort zone. Yeah. Like, even if you're a Metallica fan and that's all you want to play, yeah. Okay, I get that. But if a country guy comes along and says, if you can play these grooves, I'm going to pay you this much a night, and while your other band's not working, you could be working with me and work on your other band during the day, which is what I always did anyway. I've always been in 12 bands at a time. That's just what I do. I need to eat from all the places on the buffet. I need all of that in order to stay happy. But I just think it makes you a better player to force yourself to work on the stuff that you don't know how to do.
Right.
It just, every time you're a fish out of water, you're learning from that moment. And great example, I was a kid, putting my 19, 20 years old, anything I could do, had a night off. Local guy named Earl Zero, used to be a real well-known reggae guy around here. I never played reggae in my life. Earl knew me from the Bernie scene, and we're sitting at the bar. He's like, hey, man, I got a gig tomorrow night. I can't find a drummer. Can you play reggae? I was like, yep. Yes, I can. I had no idea how to play it, but I knew Earl paid really good. And he had a gig at like the student union at OSU or something, you know, one of those pretty good paying.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, and so I'm sitting there, and I had just gotten off work at Bernie's that day. I was working there in the mornings, and he's like, hey, man, can you Sunday night at the student union? It's like, I'll pay you blah, blah, blah. I'm like, you play reggae? You bet your ass I play reggae. I wasn't going to, you know. So I literally went home. I had like 48 hours, and I got I stopped at like Moles and used Kid Records, you know, and just like,
As a drummer, what's the key to reggae?
Well, I mean, it's just a whole other world.
Do you
like,
play the
you
one?
know, well,
do you play the one?
Well, it depends on, you know, reggae, like so many other styles of music, has lots of different grooves. The thing about reggae for me that I found interesting was that the downbeat tended to be on the 3.
Right.
You know, or if you had 4 on the floor, you know?
Right.
So to me, it was really cool because suddenly a kid who put everything on 2 and 4, now I'm going to do a whole gig where you're playing the stuff on the 3 or, you know, and I never mastered it, but I got through the gig and I learned a ton. And to this day, we were talking about Latin earlier, to this day, the reggae thing will pop up. It'll pop up. It'll just like, that's the way I have. And I've used it on recordings just a few weeks ago down with Joe Veers. There was one song, and the only way to solve what I call a musical problem was with a semi-Stuart Copeland groove.
Nice.
You know? And it's, I had it in the vocab, it was in the toolbox, and the people that I was recording for a good dear friend of mine's band. And they were all like, yeah. I was asking them, I'm like, man, too much rim shot? And they're like, oh, no, it's great. You know. So,
I'm convinced there's nothing you can't do with a kit.
Me?
Yeah.
Well, I can't, hardcore bebop, man, I'm not the jazz guy.
That's okay.
You know.
But
if
you're willing to consider something that is well orchestrated, well prepared.
Yeah. I mean, I live for that stuff.
Yeah.
I just I'm not a hardcore jazz player. I just I've never mastered it. I'm open about it. I work towards that. I have my whole life. But I think that, and this is my explanation, even though I'm still trying to figure out how to do all that, I still work on that stuff. I think that you get good at playing what you end up spending most of your life listening to, that style, and what really appeals to you. And the thing I can say is, I don't own a lot of straight up bebop records. I own a lot of the classic bebop records, you know. Miles Davis, Dave Brubeck, you know, it's all amazing stuff. It's just that it's never been the first record I want to buy, you know. So I think that I've ended up getting good at what it is that I like, for lack of a better way of putting it. And I like, as much as I love the players in the bebop world, it's not my go-to thing for music. Like if I'm on a long road trip, there's not a lot of bebop on my playlist. It's just because it's just not, it doesn't move like the songwriting. It's once again, it gets back to that kind of songwriting thing that I was talking about earlier. For me personally,
Yeah.
And so I think you kind of get good at what it is that moves you. You know, if you grew up listening to King's X, you might end up sounding like the guy from King's X, or have that in your vocabulary.
Right.
It's one of the reasons I always quote Ringo or Stuart Copeland, or, you know, because I grew up absorbing all those records and liking those records. That's why I like the D'Angelo stuff, you know, that I can't play like that guy, but that's closer to my world than bebop. You know what I mean?
Understood.
Yeah, that McClung turned me onto those guys years ago. He posted about them, and I've yeah. That's one of those modern artists that I'm like, thank God.
It's good stuff.
Because it keeps the live world, it keeps the live music world. There's a Polish bass player right now that's really got me going, a girl named Kinga Glick. Glyk, and when I was in Poland a few years ago, I saw a poster for her, and I have to say she's very attractive. So that's what I saw. I was driving by. It was on a telephone pole in Poland, in like Krakow or wherever I was, and so I went online when I got to the hotel and like looked her up, and she was a local phenom. She's from Poland. That's why she had. But now she's caught on around the world. Like there's YouTube videos of her going at it with like Marcus Miller and stuff, and hanging. I know. She's like Tal Wilkenfeld. Like the first time you see Tal, you're going to get the same thing when you see Kinga Glick.
I think I've seen her.
Yeah.
Does she have big long dreads?
Nope. I know the girl. That's not her.
She's like insane.
Kinga Glick has just little brown hair. She's a Polish girl, kind of cute.
I'll look it up.
But man, like the one that blew me away was. The Berlin Philharmonic backed her up Riverside at some big outdoor fest, and they were playing all her songs. Like, and the writing is very cool with her too, which is really neat.
It touches your heart.
Yeah, it's just really good. Like in the jazz realm, she's writing songs that I really enjoy hearing, and so I mean, and she's one of those phenoms that because of today's world, she was able to grow up absorbing all this different stuff that you get online.
Right.
And I think it's really 20 or 30 years from now, music historians are going to look back and go, the internet just changed everything. Because all these styles that would have never gotten interwoven now are getting interwoven. You know, and it used to happen before the interwebs. The interwebs are just speeding it all up. You know, the mixing process, the blending, you know, you can, as a drummer now, when you were a kid, you're only exposed to the stuff you bought on records. Right. Like, and if you didn't buy it, you weren't going to hear it. You know, you might hear some stuff on the radio, but nowadays, God, you know, with all the algorithms, I mean, YouTube will show me stuff. I'm like, oh, you gotta be kidding me. This is so cool. Yeah. There's a band called Knower out of New York City. Louis Cole, he's a really famous drummer now, travels. He's a really amazing player. But they're just some of the most incredible musicians. Have you seen that the Something Jukebox where they get a bunch of players together and do a version of something online? Like here's a swing version of a Nine Inch Nails song. Yes. Louis Cole plays drums on a lot of those, and the bass player from Nowhere is in a lot of those videos. And these guys are the hardest core of jazz guys. Crazy good. And
this inspires you.
It just inspires me because it's totally organic. They're playing real drums, a real bass, real keys, and they are killing it. And like they'll go to Paris and sell out L'Olympia. And in certain places around the country, they'll do real well. But, 1,000-seaters, that kind of thing, it's not the kind of stuff that's ever going to, it's not going to blow up into the next J-Lo or something. It's not pop music. But for players, it's like broccoli and kale. You know what I mean? It's like,
it's good for me.
It's so good for you. It's amazing. And it's their take on everything. And
we just need to keep eating the good stuff
for
ourselves.
I think
feed our souls.
You got to take care of your head, take care of your body. I mean, what's that? Mind, body, spirit thing.
Yep. It's true.
Oh, dude, I've eaten organic for years. I go out of my way to, for a guy who's overweight, I get around surprisingly well.
That's good.
And I don't have any issues. No diabetes. I don't have zip. I don't have heart problems. Nothing. My doctor, every now and then, she gets mad at me. She's like, you should have some problems. You're a big boy.
I'm a drummer.
And I think that might feed into it because of cardio.
Yeah. Oh God.
Back especially just right before COVID, I was still playing 5 nights a week.
You're moving though. You're moving.
You're loading gear in, playing for 4 hours, singing all night, whatever, sweating, loading gear out. Some of those gigs, if you're out of town, that's a 9-10 hour day. Yeah. If you're playing in Cleveland and you got a 4-hour gig, it's 2 hours there, 2 hours back.
But I'll say, Matt Mees, you just keep doing it, mister.
Oh yeah.
Keep doing it.
It's what makes me go, man.
We're going to have to wrap up, though.
Okay.
I'm sorry, but go ahead and with that.
Well, I was just going to say, the lady who handles my retirement for me, the last time she's like, so what's your target date for retirement? It's when they stick me in the ground. And she laughed, and I said, I'll slow down. I'll take some gigs. I will stop taking the stuff I don't want. But for me, I love what I do so much. The idea of retirement really scares me because once that's gone, why am I here?
Right.
You know what I mean? It's kind of like it's really been... My mom bought me a pair of drumsticks on a necklace. They wore out. The holes in them literally wore through. They were metal drumsticks. I wore them for so long. She got them when I was 9. Because I told her when I was 9, this is what I'm doing. As soon as I found the drums... Because my mom tried to veer me to a piano. And it's like, it's not
going to happen.
Not my bag, Mom. That's what you do.
Yeah.
Mom played piano, clarinet, and sang. It's like, well, I don't want to do that. You already do that. So I've worn those, and I've literally known since I was 9 exactly why I was here, what I was meant to do. In that senior year in high school when you're sitting in front of the guidance counselor, and they're doing the whole like, hey, we looked at your aptitude test. You should be an engineer. It's like, no. I've already been at, School of Music at OSU already accepted me. I'm sorry. Well, you should get the education degree. Nope, that's not why I'm here. I'm not here to teach.
Though, but you've always known what you were going to be.
Yeah, and I feel lucky. I feel like I dodged a bullet. Because my oldest brother and I had a conversation. He's 70 now. And he's like, I never had that. He worked his whole life at various jobs. But they were never the thing he wanted to do. My next older brother found the thing he needed to do, and he's still doing it. But my oldest brother, Rick, and I had a conversation a while back, and he was like, yeah, that you always knew since you were a kid. And I was like, yeah. He goes, I still don't know.
Right.
He never answered that question. got a degree in political science and went off and did a whole bunch of different things all during his life. He was a good guy, raised 4 kids, you know, but never really found his thing. And I feel like, man, I'm so lucky with that. You know, when you find the thing you love, and it's just like endlessly open-ended as far as all the stuff you can still learn.
Right.
You know?
Yep. And I think your message rings clear to that. You continue to learn. You continue to stretch yourself.
Absolutely.
And take the lessons learned and share them. You've
Absolutely.
provided a lot of good insight here for anyone listening, and it's appreciated.
I think any of the players in town who do it like I do it, they're not going to glean any new information. But if you're up and coming, there might be a few
Listen
tips.
to someone who's done this for a little while, and learn these
Yeah.
lessons along with.
Well,
this
and especially when
conversation.
you're working in situations where the money really counts, or you're working with big name people, you know, that's, you know, I got to meet Joe Miller, the guy who used to book the Rolling Stones when I was doing the Gods thing in Texas.
Yep.
Joe A. Miller, JM Productions used to book all those guys. And, you know, when you meet guys like that, you kind of realize that's a different league.
Yeah.
And they don't want to waste their time either. So,
Right.
yeah, I guess we could leave it on that, you know,
Yeah.
just
Oh, good.
know your shit and show up in a good mood and don't waste anybody's time. So we just distilled 2.5 hours of it down to.
Well, and you're still very active in some meaningful projects.
Oh, yeah.
And
Yeah.
we're gonna keep an eye out for you, man. Keep
Please.
doing it.
Yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
doing it.
You got it, brother.
Love it.
Yeah.
Matt Mees, episode 95. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you. I had a ball.
And as did I. And we thank you for listening. Bye bye.